I am the president here at 𝗧𝗏𝗃𝗧𝗓. There we go. Okay. I'm the president here at 𝗧𝗏𝗃𝗧𝗓, which is a Christian apologetics group here on campus. For those of you who don't know what apologetics is, it's not apologizing for anything. Rather, we believe in giving logical, evidence-based reasoning for our faith. We believe if you follow the evidence, wherever it leads, you'll wind up in Christianity. Christianity is true. So that being said, if after hearing tonight's presentation, you're interested in hearing more about the evidence of Christianity, we do meet every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. Here on campus in the library. So come by and see us. We're going to do a debriefing of this event tomorrow night at 7 p.m.
Is there more than one library? Because we're really dumb about stuff.
Yeah, so it's the Marriott Library, which is the main library.
Marriott?
Yeah, Marriott Library, right?
Okay.
Like the hotel. Yeah. It's right here, next to us over here.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And then, before I introduce the speaker, I'd like to take a quick second and thank the co-sponsors of the event. That's going to be Impact Campus Ministries and IntroVarsity. They both help us out. They are organic campus ministries here on campus as well as Gospel Grace Church. It's a local church down by Liberty Park. They're a great place to find wisdom. So tonight we'll be hearing from Dr. Frank Turek. Dr. Turek was an aviator in the Navy. He received his master's degree from George Washington University and his doctorate from Southern Evangelical Seminary. He's currently the president of Cross-Examine, which is a Christian apologetics organization. He's also an award-winning author of some of his books out there in front. So that being said, without further ado, let's go ahead and welcome Dr. Frank Turek.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening, Utes. Can you hear me? Is this thing working? It is working. Let's go back to September 29th, 2006. That's when Petty Officer Michael Mansour is a United States Navy SEAL operating in Ramadi, Iraq. Mansour is standing on a roof in Ramadi, and he's standing in front of a doorway to this roof. He has two Navy SEAL teammates lying in the sniper-prone position next to him. They've already taken AK-47 fire and a rocket-propelled grenade, but they're not exactly sure where the enemy is. There's a bit of a lull in the fighting. Insurgents have blocked off the streets in Ramadi, and there's someone on the loudspeaker in the town mosque yelling, "Kill the Americans!" As Mansour and his team are looking for the next attack, an insurgent from an unknown location throws a grenade up on the roof. It hits Mansour in the chest, and it falls to his feet. Due to the length of the throw, there's no opportunity to pick it up and throw it back. He has only a split second to make a decision. He can leap through the doorway behind him and save himself, but if he does, his two teammates lying near his feet will surely die. Mansour yells, "Grenade!" But instead of jumping backward to save himself, he jumps forward, chest first, onto the grenade. It detonates. 30 minutes later, 25-year-old Michael Mansour is dead. His two teammates receive only minor injuries because Mansour's body muffled the blast. One of them said at Mansour's funeral, "Mikey looked death in the face that day and said, 'You will not take my friends, I will go in their stead.'" I've never seen a United States president cry until April of 2008. That's when President George W. Bush invited Mansour's parents into the East Room of the White House to give them their son's Medal of Honor posthumously. The president couldn't even get through the citation without breaking down. Since then, Mansour's high school in Garden Grove, California, built a new stadium. They named it Michael A. Mansour Memorial Stadium. The golden trident insignia that the SEALs wear dominates the 50-yard line. January 2019, North Island, California, just outside of San Diego, the United States Navy commissioned the USS Michael Mansour, the newest guided missile destroyer in the fleet, 𝗬𝗏𝗏𝗡 class. This is Mansour's mother, Sally, being escorted onto the ship named in honor of her fallen son. Now, why did they do this? Because Michael Mansour literally sacrificed himself to save his friends. There's no greater love than to sacrifice yourself to save your friends, said Jesus of Nazareth before he went to the cross. Michael Monsoor sacrificed himself to save his friends. The question is, would anyone sacrifice himself to save you? And the answer is, someone already has. His name is Jesus of Nazareth. But many people in our culture today don't think the story's true. They think it's invented. After all, it's got miracles in it. We don't believe in miracles anymore. And it was written down by religious people. Don't religious people tend to embellish things? How can we believe such a story? Well, I actually think it's quite easy to show that Christianity is true. You only need to answer 4 questions in the affirmative to show that it's true. In other words, if you investigate these 4 questions, I think you'll realize that the answer to these 4 questions is yes. And if the answer to these 4 questions is yes, then Christianity is true. What are the 4 questions? Here are the 4 questions. Now that is some pretty grooving music, isn't it? Yeah. That is actually from our TV show, which is on Wednesday nights on DirecTV, channel 378. It would be 7 p.m. here in the Mountain Time Zone. It's on the NRB network for National Religious Broadcasters, also on Roku if you have that. If you don't have DirecTV and you don't have Roku, it's on this new thing sweeping Utah right now. It's called the Internet. Have you guys heard of this? It's on our website. We're also on radio every Saturday morning. So I don't know if it's here in the Salt Lake City area, but that doesn't matter because here it would be on at what, 8 a.m.? And I know if you're a college student, you don't get up until the crack of noon on Saturday. So it's podcasted. The show's called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. You can listen to it anytime you want. What we do is we present evidence for Christianity and we cross-examine ideas against it based on our website. There it is right there, crossexamine.org. Now, why are these the 4 questions? Truth, God, miracles, and the New Testament. And this is going to serve as our outline here tonight. Well, the first question, does truth exist? Why is that important? Because you hear people saying there's no truth, or you got your truth, or I got my truth, or all truth is relative, right? You've heard these claims, right? Well, if there's no truth, or all truth was relative, then quite obviously Christianity can't be true. Of course, if there's no truth, then atheism can't be true either. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if there was no truth, would you ever go to the University of Utah? I mean, would you ever go to school? Would you ever read a book? I mean, of course there's truth, so we're going to deal with that first. Second question, does God exist? Obviously, Christianity can't be true if there's no God. I hope to show you tonight through 3 arguments that there really is a theistic God. What's a theistic God? That's a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, moral, personal, intelligent creator who created all things and sustains all things to this very moment. These arguments are in the Bible, but you don't need the Bible to know them. In fact, we're going to try and establish point 2 without any reference to any religious work. You don't need any religious writing to know that God exists. Third question, are miracles possible? Obviously, Christianity can't be true if miracles are not possible, but I hope to show you tonight that not only are miracles possible, but the greatest miracle in the Bible has already occurred, and even atheists are admitting the data for this miracle. We'll see that here tonight. Then we're going to get to the key question, is the New Testament true? The New Testament doesn't have a prayer if there's no truth, no God, or no miracles. But if truth exists and God exists and miracles are possible, then we can see if the New Testament documents are reliable enough. They don't have to be inerrant. You don't have to consider them a religious writing, just to see if they're reliable enough to let us discover if one event from the ancient world took place, and what event would that be? The resurrection, right? Because if Jesus rose from the dead, game over, Christianity's true. Of course, if Jesus didn't rise from the dead, game over, it's false. You might as well sleep in on Sunday and do what you want the rest of the week, because if Jesus hasn't risen from the dead, Christianity's false, as even their greatest apostle Paul said in his letter to the Corinthians. In fact, Christianity is a religious worldview that you can investigate by looking at evidence. Now, there's a lot more we can go into. We don't have time to do it all here tonight, but you can show that the entire Bible is true, and you can do that. If you want to go further, you can get the book on the book table back there. There's a 12-part DVD series that goes through all this in more detail on video. And there's a newer book out there called Stealing from God. Now, Christians, this book, Stealing from God, is not about tithing, okay? All right? The subtitle is Why Atheists Need God to Make Their Case. I've noticed that when atheists are arguing there is no God, they have to actually steal aspects of reality that would only exist if God existed in order to say he doesn't exist. In effect, they have to sit in God's lap to slap his face. Now, you don't have to get any of these books. Why? Because I want to send you this entire PowerPoint presentation in a PDF format if you just text the word evidence to this phone number, 855-909-0582. That goes for the people watching on YouTube. You can just 855-909-0582, text the word evidence. I'm going to send you the entire PDF, even the slides I can't show you because we have limited time here tonight, all right? I'll put that up there at the end as well. Now, if you do buy a book or a DVD, I want to point out that all the proceeds from the books and the DVDs will go to feed needy children. Mine, okay? Just so you know. I got 3 sons, so I need some help, all right? All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to go through this, and at the end, we'll have Q&A. Actually, I don't think we're going to do Q&A tonight. I think we'll do all Q, no A, all right? So everyone gets to ask a question, takes all the pressure off me, all right? Now, we'll get to that later, all right? We're going to start right here at point 1. Does truth exist? You guys ready to go? All right. Now, whenever you start talking about truth, you always have to start with Jack Nicholson, right? Because Tom Cruise had him on the witness stand, and he said to him, "Colonel, I want the truth." And Nicholson said, "You can't handle the truth." Utes, if he said it that way, the movie would have gone nowhere. You can't handle the truth. That's not how he said it. Here's how he said it. You can't handle the truth. All right, let's try it again. I want the truth. Didn't you always want to come to class and just yell that at the professor? You guys feel a lot better now, don't you? Well, there's a lot of people that can't handle the truth. They're saying, you got your truth, I got my truth, all truth is relative. Well, if you don't get anything outside of what we talk about here tonight, this is going to be helpful even if you're an atheist or someone who's not a Christian, because we're just going to be talking about basic logic here. And this thinking skill that we're about to look at is so important that half of what you need to know to defend the Christian faith, you'll already know if you get this thinking skill down. Why? Because half of what you need to know is to be able to discover what is false. Half the battle is discovering what is false, so you can concentrate on what is true. And there are a lot of statements in our culture right now that are false because they're self-defeating. And this thinking skill will help you easily show how statements are self-defeating. And to show you what a dimwit I was 33 years old, I already had a master's degree, and I did not know what I'm about to tell you right now. And it's so simple. And the easiest way of showing you this thinking skill is to give you an example of using it. Suppose someone were to say to you, there is no truth. You should ask that person a question. What should the question be? Yeah, is that true? Is it true that there's no truth? Because if it's true that there's no truth, the claim there is no truth can't be true, but it claims to be true. Did I say that right? Can everyone see that this is a self-defeating statement? It defeats itself. It's like saying I can't speak a word in English. If I were to say I can't speak a word in English, what would you say? You just used English to say it, right? Or it'd be like saying my parents had no kids that lived. Or my brother is an only child. Or everything I say is a lie. Some of you will get that tomorrow. Or all generalizations are false. Some of you will never get that one, all right? And here's the thinking skill. Here's the thinking skill. What you need to do is you need to turn the claim on itself. Turn the claim on itself. So if somebody says there's no truth, you turn the claim on itself and you say, is that? Now, most people don't say it this way, but they're saying something similar when they say this. All truth is relative. If somebody says all truth is relative, if you turn the claim on itself, what are you going to say back? Yeah, is that a relative truth? No, see, this is an absolute truth claim, claiming all truth is relative. It's like saying I can't speak a word in English. Now, they used to say it this way. Actually, today, it's probably said, the same kind of concept is said this way. There isn't the truth, only my truth. Right? You've probably heard that. You know, you got your truth, I got my truth. There is no the truth, let's all get along. That just sounds so right, doesn't it? Sounds so Oprah, doesn't it? You got your truth, I got my truth, there is no the truth. There's a problem, though. If you turn the claim on itself, what question are you going to ask back? If someone says there isn't the truth, only my truth, you ought to ask them, is that just your truth or the truth? Because if this truth up here is just your truth, in other words, it's just your opinion, why should I believe it? But if you're saying it's the truth, you just got done telling me there isn't any the truths. Anytime you open your mouth, you're uttering a the truth. So, I know this is unpopular in today's culture, but there is no such thing as your truth or my truth. There's just the truth. I mean, to say you have your own truth, you might as well say I have my own math, right? I mean, suppose you hired me to do something, and you said, Frank, I'll pay you $10 an hour. And I worked for 15 hours, and I came to you and I said, okay, you owe me $15,000. And you go, I don't owe you $15,000, I owe you $150. And I go, oh, no, I got my own math. And you're going to say, get out of here, you're alone. Now, sometimes it isn't said this way. Sometimes it's said this way. It's true for you, but not for me. Well, you know, Christianity may be true for you, but Buddhism's true for me. Somebody says that. If you turn the claim on itself, what would you say back? This is also self-defeating. It's just a little bit more subtle. If somebody says it's true for you, but not for me, you ought to say, hey, is that true for everybody? Is true for you, but not for me, true for everybody? Because if true for you, but not for me is true for everybody, then true for you, but not for me can't be true because it's true for everybody. Did I say that right? I know that can give you intellectual constipation if you think about it long enough. But that's because it's self-defeating. It's like saying I can't speak a word in English. Actually, there's a more fun way of dealing with this. If somebody says it's true for you, but not for me, say, sure, go try that with your bank teller. Yeah, go to your bank teller and says, look, gas prices are way up. I need some extra money. I'd like $100,000 out of my account. The bank teller looks at your account and says, I'm sorry, I only have $12.06 in your account. It's easy to get the money. You simply say, ha, that's true for you, but not for me. Give me the $100,000. Are you going to get the money? No, if it's true there was only $12.06 in your account, that's true for all people at all times in all places when referring to your account at that time. It's just true. By the way, it's true that Christianity is true if Jesus really rose from the dead, regardless of what you believe about it. By the way, it's true that Christianity's false if Jesus didn't rise from the dead. In fact, I go to a lot of churches. I normally ask people, do you think Christianity is true? And most people will say yes, and then I ask them why. Do you know what answer I get more than any other, unfortunately? Because I have faith. Is that a good answer? Does your faith change whether or not Christianity is true? I mean, do you have to believe something to make it true? Do you have to believe in gravity to stay on the ground? Do people who don't believe in gravity float away? Hey, look, there's another one. Hey, if you believe, you'll come back. No, that's not the way it works. You say, why is the Bible always talking about faith then? Because there's two kinds of faith. There's belief that, and then there's belief in. Belief that is what Vince was talking about, getting evidence that something is true. That's what we call apologetics. Getting evidence that God exists, that Jesus rose from the dead. But all the belief that in the world won't get your moral transgressions forgiven. For that, you got to go from belief that to belief in, to trust in. James, the half-brother of Jesus, who wrote that little book in the New Testament called? You guys are a sharp audience tonight. James says, even the demons believe that God exists, but they tremble. Do you realize that if God exists and demons exist, and they do, that demons know that God exists better than we do? They're in the spiritual realm, but they don't trust in Jesus. They don't want to. There's a difference between belief that and belief in. In fact, we know this in relationships. When I first met my wife 37 years ago, I got evidence that she would be a good wife, but all the evidence in the world didn't make her my wife. I had to take a step of trust in her to ask her to be my wife. And in a momentary lapse of judgment, she said yes. That's the difference between belief that and belief in. Belief that is of the head. Belief in is not only of the head, it's of the heart. Most of the time when the Bible's talking about faith, it's talking about the second kind, belief in. After you know that it's true, trust in Jesus as the Savior. But God can't force you against your will to love Him. Love must be freely given. So He can give you all the evidence in the world, and if you don't want to trust in Him, that's your call. He's not going to force you into heaven against your will. So this is an important distinction, belief that and belief in. How about this? You probably hear this a lot. There's no truth in anything but science. This is also self-defeating. If someone were to say this to you, what question should you ask them? Yeah, simply say, hey, is that a scientific truth? Can you go in the laboratory and prove that? No, that's a philosophical claim. You can't prove that in the laboratory. That's a statement about science. That's not even a scientific statement. In fact, you can't do science without philosophy. Science is built on philosophy. In fact, when you get a PhD, what does a PH stand for? Philosophy. Philosophy of history, philosophy of biology, philosophy of physics, whatever it is. Philosophy undergirds everything we do. In fact, in the book Stealing from God, we have a chapter on science. Here's the title of the chapter. Science doesn't say anything. Scientists do. Why do I say that? Because all data needs to be gathered and all data needs to be interpreted. And who does that? Scientists do that. Science doesn't say a word. You ever wonder why you get conflicting advice on COVID? You say, follow the science. Which science? Sometimes scientists have good data and they interpret it properly, so you get good advice. Sometimes they have good data, but they interpret it improperly, so you get bad advice. Sometimes they have bad data, and it doesn't matter how they interpret it, you're going to get bad advice. Sometimes there's a political agenda. No, that'll never happen. Are you kidding me? Why do we think that scientists are immune to the same three motivators that can cause any of us to do wrong? Sex, money, and power. Why do we think that? Unfortunately, in today's culture, half the time I don't know what to believe about these things. I don't know who to trust anymore, do you? It's been so politicized. Why? Because science doesn't say a word. Scientists say things. Now, there are many scientific things we all agree on, you know, that water is H2O. We get all that. But some of these more complex issues, so much is built on interpretation and motives behind the interpretation. How about this? You hear this a lot. You should doubt everything. This is the skeptical claim. Somebody says you should doubt everything. You should ask that person a question. What should the question be? Yeah, should I doubt that? Why are skeptics skeptical of everything but skepticism? Why don't they doubt that? All right, now how many people in here, regardless of what you believe, Christian, non-Christian, whatever you are, how many people sometimes doubt that what you believe about these things are true? Hey, look, if you don't have your hand up right now, you're probably not thinking very much. Look, I've written books on this stuff, and sometimes I wake up in the morning and I go, I don't even know if this is true. You ever do that? And then I start thinking about my doubts, and I realize that my doubts are more emotional than intellectual. In other words, the evidence for Christianity is really good. And if I'm having a good day, everything looks fine. Bad day, don't know. Good day, fine. Bad day, don't know. Good day, fine. Bad day, don't know. What's changing, me or the evidence? Yeah, I'm going up and down. The evidence doesn't change. What you want to do if you're in this situation is you want to not concentrate on your psychology. Do you know your psychology is not going to tell you what's true outside your skull? The evidence will tell you what's true outside your skull. Your psychology can change with the pizza you ate last night, right? Don't rely on your psychology. It can go up and down with your emotions. Rely on the evidence. In fact, let me give you one example of this. Many people cannot get on an airplane. They're scared to death. But you know what the evidence shows? The evidence shows it's safer to get to the back of this room in an airplane than it is to walk there. Okay? It's the safest way to get anywhere, but people allow their psychology to overcome the evidence and then they can't do something. The truth of the matter is in the evidence. Don't concentrate on your psychology. Concentrate on the evidence. And if you concentrate on the evidence, I think you're going to realize you should start doubting your doubts. And if you start doubting your doubts, then you're back to knowing something for sure. Have you guys ever thought about doubting your doubts? I doubt it. This is a big one in our culture too. You ought not judge. Somebody says you ought not judge. They're normally going to say, and you claim to be a Christian, Jesus said don't judge. Why are you judging, you hypocrite? All right, let's leave Jesus aside for just a minute. What's the problem with this claim? Yeah, if somebody says you ought not judge, you ought to ask them, hey, is that a judgment? Or you might want to put your hands on your hips and say, if we're not to judge, then why are you judging me for judging? You say, wait a minute, didn't Jesus say don't judge? Nope, he never said it. Sure he did. He said it in Matthew chapter 7, verse 1. It's right in the middle of the famous Sermon on the Mount. Okay, I know this is going to sound odd, but it's true. There are no verses in the Bible. There are no verses in the Bible. You think when Matthew was writing his biography of Jesus, which we now call a gospel, he said, here's chapter 7, verse 1. No. When were the chapter and verse divisions added? About 500 years ago to help us navigate the text, which is a good thing. It would be really hard to find your way around this big book without numbers. Imagine if your Bible had no numbers in it, and Sunday morning the pastor gets up to preach and he says, let's go about 2/3 of the way in. Let's see if we can find the same spot, right? No, you wouldn't be able to do that, right? You need numbers. The problem is we tend to think if it's got a number in front of it, we can take it out and make it say whatever we want. We can't do that. We have to read around the passage to discover what's going on. Jesus doesn't say, judge not, and stop right there. What does he say right after that? Judge not, lest you be judged. By the same standard you judge others, you be judged by that standard. So before you try and take the speck out of your brother's eye, you hypocrite, which is a judgment, by the way, take the log out of your own eye first, then you'll be better able to help your brother. Is Jesus telling us not to judge here? No, he's telling us to take the speck out of our brother's eye. That involves making a judgment. He's simply saying, get that problem out of your life first so you can better help your brother. So this is not a command not to judge. It's actually a command on how to judge. In other words, don't judge hypocritically. If you've got that problem, fix it, then go help your brother. But it would be completely ridiculous to say don't make judgments. Why? Number one, it's a judgment itself. Number two, you'd be dead already if you didn't make judgments. You made 100 judgments tonight just getting over here, right? Good choices from bad choices, safe choices from dangerous choices, and now you're going, this was not a good choice to be here. This guy's kind of crazy, okay? Atheists make judgments. They judge there's no God. They judge Jesus didn't rise from the dead. They judge there's no objective meaning to life. It's all hopeless. When you die, you're going to become worm food. Have a nice day. These are all judgments. The question isn't whether or not you can make judgments. The question is, are your judgments true? I will say this, though. Jesus did save a very stern rebuke for people who were judgmental. And who were the judgmental ones in his day? Pharisees. Who were the Pharisees? They were the religious and political leaders of Israel. Many of them were on the Sanhedrin. That was the Jewish ruling council, their Supreme Court. And Rome delegated a lot of the day-to-day legal authority to them. They were the politicians. They ran Israel. And Jesus went after these people. Are you telling me Jesus got involved in politics? Yes! And he wasn't so nice doing it. In fact, if you think Jesus was a sweet guy who's never said a bad word about anyone, you have not read John chapter 2, John chapter 8, or Matthew chapter 23. What happens in John chapter 2? Jesus makes a whip, and he goes and he jacks people up in the temple. Sweet and gentle Jesus did this? Yes. And then in John chapter 8, he's having an argument with these Pharisees. And he's right in the middle of the argument with them, and he says, your father is the devil. Jesus, you can't say that. That's not very Christ-like. Excuse me, I am Christ. You imagine you're having an argument with somebody, and you stop right in the middle, and you go, your father is the devil. Don't try that with a sibling, by the way. And then in Matthew 23, Jesus is talking to these same Pharisees, and he says, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites. You strain out a gnat and swallow a camel. Oh, you look great on the outside. You're whitewashed tombs, but on the inside, you're full of dead men's bones. You go a mile to make a convert, and then once you make him a convert, you make him twice as much a son of hell as you are. How will you avoid being condemned to hell? What? Sweet and gentle Jesus said this? Jesus was not Barney. He was not Mr. Rogers. Can't we all get along, boys and girls? No. In fact, Jesus said, I came to bring a sword. It's going to divide mother and daughter, father and son. Jesus was tough. In fact, why did they kill him? Number one, he claimed to be God. That's blasphemy to the Jews and sedition to the Romans. And number two, he spoke truth to power, particularly the temple authorities who knew that if Jesus succeeded, they were out of work. Remember those three motivators, sex, money, and power? Caiaphas knew Jesus had resurrected Lazarus from the dead. And you know what he says about this? It's better that one innocent man die than the whole nation of Israel perish. He knew it, and he still wanted him dead. By the way, I've noticed one other thing about judging. You ever notice when you compliment somebody, which is a judgment, nobody gets upset? You know, if you say to your best friend, I really love you, you're such a wonderful person, I wish I could be like you. You think your friend's going to go, well, who are you to judge? Right. Your friend's never going to say that. See, I've noticed that people don't have a problem with judging. They just have a problem with judgments they don't like. In fact, if you tell somebody something that's true and they get upset with you, you just help convict them. As Augustine said, we love the truth when it enlightens us. We hate the truth when it convicts us. For you military people in here, by the way, I was in the Navy for 8 years, which stands for never again volunteer yourself. Okay? For you military people in here, you always get more flack when you're over the target. If you tell somebody something that's true and they're shooting back at you, you're over the target. They don't want their evil deeds exposed. As Jesus said, men love darkness rather than light. So don't buy into this idea you can't make judgments. You have to make judgments. You just shouldn't be judgmental. In fact, somebody said this, evangelism is just one beggar showing another beggar where the food is. We're no better than anyone else without Jesus. Now, we could spend more time, but we don't have time. There's many more self-defeating statements. I just want to sum it all up this way. Can everybody see that this statement right here shoots itself? All the other statements we went through shoot themselves too, all right? So you can't get away from truth. Actually, you can get away from it temporarily. What do? You suppress it. In fact, a little bit later when we do Q&A, if you're not a Christian in here, I may ask you a question. And it's not fair of me to do that without warning you what the question is in advance. So here's the question I might ask you. If Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? I've had atheists stand at that microphone in front of hundreds of people and say, no. No? How's that reasonable? How's that rational? It's not. The problem isn't here, the problem's here. They don't want it to be true. They don't want there to be a God. Why? Because they want to be God of their own lives. They're not on a truth quest, they're on a happiness quest. And they're just going to believe whatever they think is going to make them happy. Here's the problem. You can make yourself happy doing a lot of fun things over the short term, but over the long term, it's a disaster. And everyone in this room over 40 knows what I'm talking about because many of us have tried it ourselves, right? I'm going to do it my way, and I'm going to be hit. No, if you want true contentment, you got to go straight through truth, and Jesus is the truth. I realize a lot of people don't like Christianity because they don't like the church. I get that, but let me ask you guys a question. If somebody plays Beethoven poorly, who do you blame? You don't blame Beethoven. If somebody plays Christ poorly, you don't blame Christ. Newsflash, the church is not Christianity. Jesus is Christianity. We are all fallen. We all need a Savior. We don't always behave rightly. But don't let that keep you out of the kingdom. Focus on Jesus. Unfortunately, a lot of people are looking for God like a criminal's looking for a cop. They don't want God to exist. But He's always open, He's always ready, He's always welcoming. All right, truth does exist. If that's the case, relativism and postmodernism have to be false because they claim it's true that there is no truth. So now we're going to see, is it true that God exists? Is it true that God exists? I mentioned 3 arguments we wanted to look at. Here are the 3 arguments. The first argument is from the beginning of the universe, known as the cosmological argument. Now, cosmological comes from the Greek word cosmos, which means world or universe. And it says if the universe had a beginning, then it must have had a beginner. The second argument is the argument from design, known as the teleological argument. Telos is a Greek word meaning design or purpose. And it says if there's design in the universe and design in life like you, there's got to be a designer. Now, these 2 arguments have some scientific evidence behind them. We'll see a little bit of that here in a minute. The third argument doesn't have any science behind it. It's more philosophical in nature, yet it's the argument you intuitively understood when you were a very small child, and it's the argument from morality known as the moral argument. And it says if there's one thing morally wrong out there, just one, then there has to be a God. Why? Because if there is no standard beyond morality or beyond humanity, then everything's a matter of opinion. Now, we all know torturing babies for fun is wrong. We all know that murdering innocent people in a Holocaust is wrong. We all know that invading another country without provocation is wrong. If that's the case, there must be a standard of right beyond us. If there's no standard of right beyond us, then everything's just a matter of opinion. And we know these things aren't just a matter of opinion. Now, we'll get to that argument later, and we're going to spend most of our time actually on these three arguments. But we're going to start right here at the cosmological argument. Now, you got to admit it was worth coming here tonight just to see God do that. Some of you say, I've never seen God move. Oh, really? Check this out. Now, this is the argument that many say points back to the big... Now, I know there's some Christians in here saying, Frank, we're Christians in here, and we don't believe in the Big Bang. You guys don't believe in the Big Bang? I believe in the Big Bang. I just know who banged it. In fact, the evidence for the Big Bang is so good that even atheistic scientists like Stephen Hawking, who was probably the most famous atheistic physicist or atheist physicist in the world until he died about 5 years ago, they virtually all agree that the universe had a beginning. Here's how Hawking put it. He said, almost everyone now believes that the universe and time itself had a beginning at the Big Bang. Now, Hawking tried to come up with another explanation other than God. He failed, but he's admitting the data, that space, time, and matter literally had a beginning out of nothing. An agnostic cosmologist by the name of Alexander Vilenkin, who teaches at Tufts University, put it this way in his book on the topic. He said, with the proof now in place, cosmologists, by the way, a cosmologist is not someone that puts on your makeup, all right? Cosmologist is someone that studies the universe. Cosmologists can no longer hide behind the possibility of a past eternal universe. There is now no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning. Now, there's a couple interesting words in this quote. The first word is the word proof. Unusual for scientists to use the word proof. Why? Because science is tentative. Scientific theories are overturned all the time because new evidence comes in. But Vilenkin, and he's an agnostic, sees so much evidence pointing toward a beginning, he calls it a proof. The other interesting word is the word problem. Why is it a problem if there was a cosmic beginning? Because if there was a cosmic beginning to all of nature, what could have created nature? Can't be something in nature, must be something beyond nature. Now, again, Vilenkin's agnostic on this. He doesn't know what the ultimate cause is, but he's admitting that the data shows an absolute beginning. Now, we're not going to go through the evidence for this. Why? Number one, we don't have time. Number two, it's all in the book, chapter 3. Number three, it's not controversial. Even atheists are admitting it. So let's just jump to the bottom line. And here it is. If the universe had a beginning, it seems it must have had a beginner. We've got two options. Either no one created something out of nothing, which is the atheistic view, or someone created something out of nothing, which is the theistic view. Now, which view is more reasonable? That no one created something out of nothing, or that someone created something out of nothing? What do you think? Someone. I was at Texas A&M probably 10 years ago or more, and an atheist said, I think number one is more reasonable. I said, time out, let's look at this again. Number two says someone created something out of nothing. Now, that's a miracle, right? But at least you got a miracle worker. You got someone. Number one is a miracle with no miracle worker. That's clearly absurd. By the way, do you realize that everyone agrees or everyone believes in at least one miracle? Christians believe in this miracle and many others, but atheists believe in a miracle. Some of them believe that no one created something out of nothing. Now, which view takes more faith? In fact, I said to the audience at Texas A&M that night, I said, to show you how seriously we all believe in the law of causality. By the way, law of causality doesn't say everything has a cause. Law of causality says everything that comes to be has a cause. There has to be an uncaused first cause. It's either the universe or something outside the universe. But everything that has a beginning has a cause. So I said to A&M that night, I said to show you how seriously we all take the law of causality, that things don't pop into existence out of nothing, by nothing, without a cause. There is nobody sitting here in this auditorium tonight who is currently worried that as you sit here, a hippopotamus has appeared out of nothing, by nothing, in your dorm room and is currently pooping on your pillow. You don't worry about that. You're not worrying that a raging Bengal tiger is just going to appear right here in the auditorium and start devouring people, right? Why? Because you know that things don't pop into existence out of nothing, by nothing, without a cause. And if the whole universe could do so, then why doesn't everything do so? Why don't Teslas pop into existence out of nothing, by nothing, without a cause? Would be good right now, right? You wake up one morning, you look in your driveway, your Hyundai is a Tesla. And you go, how do I charge this thing, right? Why don't MacBook Pros pop into existence out of nothing, by nothing, without a cause? Could have saved me like $4,000. If you're hungry after this little seminar here and you want to have a pizza, does it make sense to order one? Or should you just sit in your dorm room, wait, and hope one pops into existence out of nothing, by nothing, without a cause? No. It seems to me the atheists have all the faith here. In fact, here's a question to ask an atheist. If there is no God, why is there something rather than nothing at all? In other words, if there is no God, why does anything exist? This is a question the philosopher Leibniz posed. Why does anything exist if there's no God? The universe had a beginning. Seems like there must be something outside the universe that brought it into existence. In fact, if space, matter, and time really had a beginning, as the evidence seems to show, whatever created space, matter, and time can't be made of space, matter, and time. In other words, the cause must be spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful to create the universe out of nothing, personal in order to choose to create, because to go from a state of nothingness to a state of creation, someone had to make a choice, and only persons can make choices. The being would also have to be intelligent to have a mind to make a choice. Now, ladies and gentlemen, when you think about a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent cause, who do you think of? Say God. We say, how do you know it's the Christian God, Frank? We don't. Yet. I mean, this could be Allah or some other God. The cosmological argument doesn't get you all the way to Christianity. It could be the Christian God, but you got to do more research. You got to see if it's true that Jesus rose from the dead. And after you see that, if he really did rise from the dead, then we can conclude that the same being that walked out of the tomb 1,989 years ago is the same being in whose divine nature created the universe out of nothing. You don't get all the way there, but we're on our way. All right, the next argument is called the teleological argument, and there's two aspects to this argument. It appears the universe is designed, and it appears you're designed. Life is designed. Let's look at the universe first. Scientists have discovered in recent decades that the universe is fine-tuned to support life. That if you were to change any one of a number of factors about our universe, virtually imperceptibly, there would either be no universe or no universe that could support life. In fact, Stephen Hawking, the atheist, again, put it this way. He said if the expansion rate of the universe was different by 1 part in 1,000 million, a second after the Big Bang, the universe would have collapsed back on itself or never developed galaxies. If the expansion rate was that infinitesimally different from the very beginning, there would be no universe that could support us. Now, you can't make any sort of evolutionary claim or argument or explanation for this. Why? Because the expansion rate did not evolve to a particular point. The expansion rate started there. It's an initial condition. Seems to me the same being that created space-time and matter is the same being that fine-tuned the expansion rate to be precisely what it needed to be. The gravitational force, if it were altered by more than 1 part in 10 to the 40th power compared to the strong nuclear force, we wouldn't be here. Now, what's 1 part in 10 to the 40th power? 1 part in 10 to the 40th power is 1 part in 1 with 40 zeros following it. You say, Frank, I can't get my head around that number. I know, neither can I. Let me give you an illustration. Take the entire North American continent and put dimes on it and stack dimes on the entire North American continent all the way to the moon. That's over 200,000 miles, right? And then do that on more than 1 billion other North American continents. Stack dimes on it all the way to the moon. Then mark 1 dime red, mix it up among all those North American continents, blindfold a friend, throw him in the pile, tell him to pick one. If he picks the red one, then it's 1 in 10 to the 40th power that he'll get it by chance. Now, I don't have enough faith to believe that that value just landed there by chance. Look, there's only two possibilities. That value is designed to be there, or it wasn't designed to be there. What makes more sense? It was designed. You say, well, maybe it happened by chance. Ladies and gentlemen, is chance a cause? Does chance cause things? Who caused this? Chance, he was just here. No. Chance is not a cause. Chance is a word we use to describe mathematical possibilities. Chance doesn't do anything. When scientists use the word chance, you know what they really mean? We don't know. Look, it's designed or it's not. Sure seems to be designed. Now, it's not just our solar system or not just the universe that appears to be designed. Our solar system appears to be designed with us in mind. Let's take a look at the solar system here for a second. Here we are, third rock from the sun. If we were just a little bit closer to or a little bit further away, we couldn't survive. A little bit closer to, we'd burn up. A little bit further away, we'd freeze. We are what scientists call the Goldilocks zone. It's not too hot. It's not too cold. It is? That's a lie. It's too cold here in the winter. The axial tilt, 23.5 degrees. Change that slightly, we don't exist. Earth rotation, 24 hours. Change that slightly, we don't exist. The size and distance of the moon from us. Change that slightly, we don't exist. If Jupiter was not in its current orbit, we couldn't exist here on Earth. Why not? What does Jupiter do for us? It's a cosmic vacuum cleaner. Its gravitational force is so strong that it attracts most of the meteors and space junk to it rather than us. In fact, if you take a close-up look at Jupiter, these dark marks here, those are comet fragment strikes that are bigger than the Earth. Thank God for Jupiter. In fact, if Jupiter wasn't there, we wouldn't be here. Saturn does the same thing. In fact, take a look at Saturn here. There's Saturn. In fact, here's all the planets. There's Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Earth. Look at poor Pluto down here. You know, Pluto recently has been demoted as a planet. I don't know about you, but I think it's size discrimination. And what if Pluto identifies as a planet? You bigots? Take a look at this. You can hardly see Pluto. Take a look at this. That's Arcturus. That's another star in our galaxy. Here's the sun. Jupiter is 1 pixel in size on this scale. Earth is invisible. Pluto, forget about it. All right, keep an eye on Arcturus now. Where's Arcturus? Now. See it way over here? That's Antares. That's another star in our galaxy. The sun is 1 pixel in size on this scale. Jupiter is invisible. Earth, Pluto, forget about them. In fact, if the Earth was the size of a golf ball, Betelgeuse here. Look, I don't name the stars, okay? If the Earth was the size of a golf ball, Betelgeuse would be 5 or 6 Empire State Buildings high. The heavens are awesome. And that's just in our galaxy. And the average distance between stars in our galaxy is 30 trillion miles, and all that distance is necessary for us to exist here on Earth. Now, how far is 30 trillion miles? Far. Take you at least 2 tanks of gas in a Toyota Prius to go 30 trillion miles. A number of years ago, my wife and I were at the Desert Museum down in Tucson, Arizona. If you ever get to go to Tucson, go to the south side of the city, over the ridge there, and that Desert Museum, on a clear night, you can see thousands of stars in the sky. So we're out there one night, and the guide says, hey, it's so clear tonight that if we look up at 9:03, we will see the space shuttle in orbit. I said, oh, come on, we're not going to see the space shuttle. It's only 120 feet long. It's 350 miles up. We're not going to see it. Oh, me of little faith. At 9:03, the guide goes, look! When we look up in the sky, there's an object streaking out of the western desert sky relative to us about like this. I mean, it's really cooking. When it got right about here, it disappeared. I don't know whether Scotty beamed it up or what. Actually, what happened was, despite the fact that we were in total darkness, the space shuttle was so high up that the sun was still reflecting off of it. When it got out of the range of the sun, we couldn't see it anymore. Now, when the space shuttle was in orbit, the space shuttle was traveling at about 18,000 miles an hour. That's 5 miles per second. You got trouble getting to school in the morning? Take the space shuttle. You'll be 5 miles a second. Think about how fast that is. Well, I did a little calculation to try and figure out how long would it take us if we could get in the space shuttle and go 5 miles a second if we wanted to go from our star, the sun, to another star an average distance away 30 trillion miles. How long would it take us to go 30 trillion miles if we could go 5 miles a second? How long? A long time. You must be a math major. It would take us 201,450 years. That means if you got in the space shuttle at the time of Christ and started traveling from our star, the sun, to another star inside our galaxy an average distance away, you've been going 5 miles a second for 2,000 years. You would be less than 1/100th of the way there right now. And we're going to explore space. No, we're not. We're not going anywhere in space. We can hardly get out of our solar system. It took us 9 years to get to Pluto. Forget it. Now, what does God say about the heavens? Here's what he says. For as high as the heavens are above the earth, so great is his love for those who fear him. How high are the heavens above the earth? How many stars are out there? Well, the Hubble Space Telescope helped us discover that. A number of years ago, they trained the Hubble Space Telescope on 1/26 millionth of the sky. What's 1/26 millionth of the sky? Go out tonight, put a piece of rice on the end of your finger, hold it up. That piece of rice represents about 1/26 millionth of the sky. So they zoomed Hubble in on 1/26 millionth of the sky for about 11 days of exposure time. This is called Hubble Ultra Deep Field. You can Google this. I'm going to show you a short video that they put together as to what they found in this speck of the sky. I don't know if you can see this, but along the bottom here, these are mountains, and this is a section of the southern sky in the southern hemisphere. I'm going to play this short video. You're going to see the constellations come up, and then Hubble's going to zoom in on 1/26 millionth of the sky. There is no audio, it's just video. You guys ready? Here we go. Let's see what they found. There are the constellations. What you're looking at are nearly 10,000 galaxies, each with billions of stars of their own. So how many stars are there in the entire universe? Researchers at the University of Hawaii think they figured it out. The number of stars in the entire universe is about equivalent to the number of grains of sand on all the beaches, on all the earth, times 100,000. And to go from one star to another star, going 5 miles a second just in our galaxy will take you over 200,000 years. The heavens are awesome. Now you know why the Bible says the heavens declare the glory of God. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't want to ever hear anyone else here at the University of Utah ever use the word awesome ever again unless you're referring to God or the heavens. Awesome shot, dude. Awesome shirt, dude. Awesome TikTok video. No! What are you going to say for God? By the way, I didn't complete the entire verse a minute ago. Here's the entire verse. For as high as the heavens are above the earth, so great is his love for those who fear him. As far as the east is from the west, so far as he removed our transgressions from us. You see, an infinite universe, appears infinite to us, is supposed to give us an idea of the majesty of God. God is infinitely just, which means he can't allow sin to go unpunished, but he's also infinitely loving, which means he doesn't want to punish us. So what does he do? He removes our transgressions from us as far as the east is from the west by taking our punishment on himself. That's what he does. And all you need to do to be saved from your punishment is to accept what he's done. There's nothing else you can do to earn it. He's paid it all. Now, when you look at a universe that has stars equivalent to sand grains on 100,000 Earths, does that make you feel insignificant? It shouldn't. Why? Because as amazing as the heavens are, they're not made in the image of God, but you are. Here's the second aspect of the teleological argument. You're designed. In fact, this is you in the womb at 11 weeks. Question, is this animal, mineral, vegetable, or human? In fact, let's go back even further than 11 weeks. Let's go back to when your mother and your father got together to conceive you. Have you guys had this talk before? I see some young people in here, so I'll try and be discreet. I also see some older people in here, so I'll try and be discreet as well, just in case you've forgotten how this works. When your mother and your father got together to conceive you, your mother unconsciously perfumed her egg to attract your father, and then your father sent the entire population of the United States, 300 million soldiers, toward your mother's egg. And then there was a race. And you won. That's right. Don't let anyone ever tell you you're not special. You have blown away anything Michael Phelps has done. Now, seeing some of you limp in here earlier makes it hard for me to believe you were the fastest soldier in the gene pool. But you were. Now, your soldier was 20 to 30 times smaller than a grain of salt, yet it contained half of the 3.5 billion letter genome, your DNA, your software program, that makes you you. All the letters were in the right order. And your mother's egg was about the size of a period at the end of a sentence in an average book, and it contained the other half of the 3.5 billion letter software program that makes you you. All the letters are in the right order. When your soldier and egg came together, a new 100% genetic human being was created. You know, you have not received any more genetic information from this point till right now. Your genetic information has just duplicated itself. In fact, there were only 4 things separating you from adulthood: time, air, water, and food. Those are the same 4 things that separate a 2-year-old from adulthood. Does this have implications on the abortion issue? Yeah, I think it does. We don't kill the 2-year-old. Why do we kill the unborn child in the womb? Genetically, it's the same. You say, wait a minute, Frank, you can't legislate morality. All right, no extra charge for this. This was the subject of our first book, creatively titled Legislating Morality. All laws legislate morality. Every law declares one behavior right and the opposite behavior wrong. You can't think of a law that doesn't legislate morality. The only question is, whose morality will you legislate? Now, when people say, hey, don't impose your morality on me, I go, why not? Would that be immoral? Actually, you're imposing your morality on me right now. You're saying I ought not impose ought nots, and you're imposing that ought not on me. Why do you get to impose your morality, but I don't get to impose mine? Actually, when people say, don't impose your morality on me, I say, look, this isn't my morality. I didn't make this stuff up. I didn't make up the fact that murder's wrong, that abortion's wrong, that rape is wrong, that theft is wrong, that men were made for women and women were made for men, and the best way to perpetuate and stabilize society, which is the reason the government's involved in marriage to begin with, is to legally recognize that man-woman relationship over every other relationship. I didn't make any of this stuff up. This isn't my morality. This isn't your morality. This just happens to be the morality. The one Thomas Jefferson said was self-evident. The one the Apostle Paul said, the Gentiles are not of the law written on their hearts. Everybody knows this morality, but not everybody likes it. In fact, if you have a problem with the morality, you don't have a problem with me. You have a problem with the Creator upon whose nature this morality is derived. All right, no extra charge for that. Let's go back to this. From this point till right now, a construction project of astonishing complexity began taking place. Cells began multiplying at a rate of 4,000 cells per second. Brain cells began multiplying at a rate of 100,000 cells per second. For most of you, anyway. Some cells became brain cells, others lung cells, others heart cells. How did they know how to do this? Nobody knows. Some cells went so far across you to become what they needed to become that it would be equivalent to you today walking across the United States alone. And that construction project continues to this very moment. You just made 4 million new red blood cells. You just made another 4 million new red blood cells. You just made another 4. Knock it off. Are you thinking about this? Do you have to concentrate on this? Are you going, hold on, Frank, time out. I got to make new red blood cells. No, this is just happening. It's happening automatically. How is it happening? Aristotle noticed something 2,400 years ago. Obviously, he didn't know anything about blood cells, but he did notice that all of nature's going in a direction. For example, why does an acorn, if it's properly nourished, always go in the direction of becoming an oak tree? Why doesn't it become an elm tree or a birch tree or a seahorse? You say, because it's programmed to become an oak tree. Well, who programmed it? And is an acorn conscious? Is an acorn in the ground going, all right, what do I have to do to become an oak tree? No. But it reliably goes in the direction of becoming an oak tree. If it doesn't have a mind of its own, yet it reliably goes in a direction, there must be an external mind directing it toward an end. This is what Aristotle called the unmoved mover. Thomas Aquinas came along in the 1200s and said, this is going to be my fifth way to argue for God, that all of nature is going in a direction. If it's going in a direction, there must be a director. Not his words, mine. There's got to be somebody moving all this. Nature is going toward an end, a final cause. Now, this is not a Big Bang cause way back when. In fact, Aristotle mistakenly thought the universe was eternal. But you know what he said? Even if it is eternal, you need a cause every single second of existence to keep things moving in the direction they go. This is why the Apostle Paul came along and said, in him we live and move and have our being. And Christ holds all things together. And the writer of Hebrews says, God sustains all things by his powerful word. In fact, God is to the universe what a band is to music. If a band were up here playing music, the band would be creating and sustaining the music, right? What would happen to the music the second the band stopped playing? Music's over. Same thing is true with God. God creates the universe, creates the natural laws that govern it. He creates you, and he sustains the universe, the natural laws that govern it, and he sustains you every single second. By the way, this is why we can do science, because the universe is orderly and predictable. If it wasn't orderly and predictable, you couldn't find reliable cause and effect, and you wouldn't exist, and neither would I. Now, there's more on this in the Stealing from God book, but we got to move on to our third argument for God, and that is the moral argument. Let me ask you guys a question. How do you know that your quarterback throwing a touchdown is better than your quarterback throwing a pick six? That's where the other team intercepts the ball and takes it back for a touchdown themselves. How do you know that? You guys sound like Charlie Brown's teacher over here. What? Not the rules. You got to know what the purpose of the game is in order to know that a touchdown for you is better than the other team scoring a touchdown on you, right? If the purpose of the game is to score more points than the other team and you know a touchdown gets you that, you're going to say, okay, this is a good play. The pick six is a bad play. If there is no purpose to the game, you can't differentiate between good and bad plays, right? Now, the same thing is true in life. If there's no purpose to life, you can't differentiate between good and bad ways to live. Now, in football, notice that the purpose of the game comes from outside the game. In the stadium right out here, when they play college football, they show up on the field, but they don't make the rules up, right? It's made up long before they get there from outside the game. The NCAA does all that, right? The rules are already set. But in football, the rules are arbitrary. They could be different, and they change them sometimes a little bit, right? But in life, the rules aren't arbitrary. They come from God's nature. And those rules are put in place to help us achieve the purpose of the game. Question, is the purpose of a football game to obey the rules of football? No. Obeying the rules just helps you achieve the purpose, but the purpose is not to obey the rules. Same thing is true in life. The rules are just there to help you achieve the purpose. They're not the purpose of life. Now, if there's no God, there's no purpose. So you can't say this is good and this is bad. In fact, if there is no God, then you can't say the Nazis were wrong. You can't say Putin's wrong or anybody's wrong, because if there's no standard beyond our government, then you can't say that the German government was wrong and the American government was right. If there is no God, then love is no better than rape. Oh, you may like love better, but it's not objectively better. That's just your preference. If there is no God, there are no human rights. There's a lot of people in our culture today asking for rights, saying they have rights, and they're right about that. But many of them are atheists. If there's no God, there are no rights. Everything's just a matter of opinion. Our founding fathers knew this. They said, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men were created and endowed by their government. No, it doesn't say that. Endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. And governments are instituted among men to secure rights, not to give rights or take them away. Rights come from God. If there's no God, there's no rights. There's not only no right to abortion, as some people think, there's no right to life if there's no God. In fact, slavery and racism aren't wrong if there's no God. Murder isn't wrong if there's no God. It's just your opinion, because there's no purpose to life. If there is no God, tolerance is no better than intolerance. By the way, are Christians commanded to be tolerant? That's right, they're not. Christians are commanded to be loving. There's a difference. Tolerance says hold your nose and put up with them. Love says reach out and help them. And sometimes, in order to love somebody, you can't tolerate what they do. In fact, how many people in here are parents? All right, how many people in here are former children? Okay, that's all of us then, all right? Question, if your parent approved of everything you wanted to do as a child, was that parent loving? No. We mistakenly in our culture think love requires approval. No, no, no. Love requires truth. You can't approve of what your kid wants to do if it's evil. You need to stand in the way of that. The famous economist Thomas Sowell, who's now 91 years old, put it this way. He says, when you tell somebody what they need to hear, you're helping them. When you tell people what they want to hear, you're helping yourself. You know why you tell people you love what they want to hear? So they don't get mad at you. Guess what? You're helping yourself. You're not helping them. And if there is no God, you can't complain about the problem of evil. Why? Because if there is no God, there's no such thing as good or evil. Everything's just a matter of opinion. In fact, C.S. Lewis famously thought there couldn't be a good God because there was too much evil in the world. He just came out of World War I. And he said there's too much injustice in the world. And then one day he had an epiphany. He realized this argument didn't work, and he wrote it in the book Mere Christianity. Here's what he wrote. He said, as an atheist, my argument against God was that the universe seems so cruel and unjust, but how had I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust? You see, you wouldn't know what a crooked line was unless you knew what a straight line was. You wouldn't know what injustice was unless you knew what justice was. You wouldn't know something was not right unless you knew that something was right. In other words, if you're going to say something's wrong, if something's evil, you've got to know what good is. But good only exists if God exists. You see, evil doesn't disprove God. Evil may prove there's a devil out there, but evil doesn't disprove God, because there'd be no such thing as evil unless there were good, and there'd be no such thing as good unless God existed, because his nature is what we mean by the standard of good. You say, explain that another way. Look, evil doesn't exist on its own. Evil only exists as a lack in a good thing. Evil is like cancer. If you take all the cancer out of a good body, you got a better body, right? What happens if you take all the body out of the cancer? Doesn't exist. Doesn't exist on its own. Evil is like rust in a car. If you take all the rust out of a car, you got a better car. What happens if you take all the car out of the rust? You got a Pinto, all right? No, it doesn't exist. It only exists if a good thing exists. So evil doesn't exist on its own. In fact, you could look at it this way. The shadows prove the sunshine. In order to have shadows, you got to have sunshine. In other words, in order to have evil, you have to have good. Oh, you can have sunshine without shadows. You can have good without evil, but you can't have shadows without sunshine. You can't have evil without good. So if evil exists, and we all know it does, then God exists. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but it's true. Now, we could ask the question, maybe during the Q&A we can, well, if there is a good God, why does he allow certain evils? We can get into that, but we can't say he doesn't exist. All right, last thing on this. What does it mean to submit? No one likes this word. Let's break the word up. Submission. What does mission mean? It means you have a goal, you have purpose, right? You're going somewhere. What does sub mean? It means you're putting your efforts toward the achievement of that goal. You are putting your own personal goals aside, and you're going to pursue this goal. You're submitting yourself to it. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I don't know why we get upset at this, but if there is a God, and there is, and he has a mission for us to know him and to make him known, then we would be foolish not to submit our efforts to that goal. Because our own little submissions going our own way, they're not going to matter unless they're pursuing the mission that he wants us to pursue, the eternal mission. Submission is the most intelligent thing any of us could do if God exists. And he does. All right, now, you say, Frank, come on. Atheists have to have arguments against this stuff, right? Well, they try, but at the end of the day, they fail. Why? Because if atheism is true, the kind of atheism that most atheists believe today, materialism, atheistic materialism, then reason doesn't even work. You can't even have reasons against this. Because if you're just a molecular machine, if we're all just molecular machines, if we're all just moist robots, if everything we think is completely controlled by the laws of physics, then we shouldn't trust anything we think. And no one said this better than C.S. Lewis, so I'm just going to read you what he said. Here's what Lewis said about atheism, how it makes reason impossible. It's a two-slide quote. He says, "Suppose there were no intelligence behind the universe. In that case, nobody designed my brain for the purpose of thinking. Thought is merely the byproduct of some atoms within my skull. But if so, how can I trust my own thinking to be true? But if I can't trust my own thinking, of course I can't trust the arguments leading to atheism, and therefore have no reason to be an atheist or anything else. Unless I believe in God, I can't believe in thought, so I can never use thought to disbelieve in God." Boom, as John Madden would say. You can't say it any better than that. Atheism makes reason impossible, so don't try and bring reasons against God if you don't have any ground for reason. You have to steal reason from God in order to say he doesn't exist. Now, what do we get from these three arguments? A spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, moral, personal, intelligent creator who created all things and sustains all things. And we haven't even opened the Bible yet. Now, how do we know it's the Christian God? For that, we got to go to the next question. Are miracles possible? And you're probably going, Frank, you're running out of time. Miracles don't take long, okay? This whole section doesn't take long. The God section was the longest section. Why miracles? Because God can use miracles to tell us who speaks for him. That's what miracles are often used for in the Bible. The problem is, a lot of people think miracles are impossible. For example, the Noah miracle. Is this being recorded? Yeah, it is. Let's try and keep this between us. Christians, any Christians in here? Just keep this between us. Can we all agree that Noah and the ark is crazy? Thank you. It is. All right. And resurrections. How many people in here have seen somebody rise from the dead? Yeah, none of us. Yet if you're a Christian, your entire belief system hinges on believing something that none of us have ever seen. How rational is that? And for some reason, the big problem miracle in the Bible is Jonah. Is that a whale of a tale or a tale of a whale? I mean, what is the deal with Jonah? Can you really believe in Jonah? Please. All right, now what is the greatest miracle in the Bible? It's not the resurrection. The greatest miracle in the Bible is... I got some of you a second time. The greatest miracle in the Bible is the first verse. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. If that verse is true, every other verse is at least possible. All right? So, if the universe had a beginning, and even atheists are admitting it had a beginning, Again, Hawking doesn't think it was God, but what else could it be? If that's the case, then every one of these other miracles is at least possible. Of course Noah's crazy, unless God exists. Of course miracles like resurrections don't occur, unless God exists. Of course Jonah's a fairy tale, unless God exists. If God can create the whole universe out of nothing, can he resurrect Jesus from the dead? Can he walk on water? Can he do the Noah miracle, the Jonah miracle, any other miracle? Of course he can. The only question is, has he done it? That's the only question. Let me just say one other thing about miracles. And that is, a lot of people don't believe in miracles because they've never seen one. That's not a good reason to disbelieve something. Why? Because you believe in a lot of things you've never seen. You believe in your mind. Have you ever seen it? You're using it right now. You believe in the laws of logic, the laws of mathematics. You ever seen them? No, but you're using them right now. You believe in justice. Have you ever seen justice? Oh, you may have seen things that are just or unjust, but you've never seen justice because it's an immaterial virtue grounded in the nature of God. You believe in love. Have you ever seen love? In fact, I had a couple of debates years ago with Christopher Hitchens. You remember Christopher Hitchens? He was a brilliant British atheist who sounded more brilliant than he was because he had a British accent. And at one of our debates, a student in the audience asked Hitchens this question, Christopher, what is love? And Hitchens, being a materialist, had to come up with a materialistic answer, so he said, love is a chemical. And I said, don't say that to your wife. Honey, do you love me? Yeah. Why? I don't know. I got the chemical today. You know, might not have it tomorrow. Who knows? By the way, the most important things in life have little to do with science. Think about this. Honey, do you love me? Yeah. Why? I don't know. Let's run some kind of experiment. No, they have nothing to do with science. You don't see love because it's an immaterial virtue grounded in the nature of God. You may see examples of it, but you don't see it itself. You've never seen gravity. Oh, Frank, come on, there it is right there. No, you're not seeing gravity. What are you seeing? You're seeing the effects of gravity. By the way, that's how we know God exists. If someone ever asks you, how do you know God exists? Here's what you ought to say. I know God by his effects. If there's a creation, which everyone agrees there is a creation, that's an effect. You reason back to a cause, a creator. If there's design, that's the effect. You reason back to a cause, a designer. If there's a moral law written on your heart, that's the effect. You reason back to a cause, a moral lawgiver. If you have the ability to reason, you have a mind, and there's these laws of logic, you reason back to a cause, a mind. You're going from effect to cause. That's what scientists do. They see effects, and they're trying to figure out what caused the effect. So we know God exists by his effects. You know, you've never seen George Washington or Joseph Smith, even though he has a statue over here. You've never seen him, but you believe in him. Why? Because he's left effects behind that are best explained by George Washington or Joseph Smith or Jesus of Nazareth. Effects. That's why you know that God exists. And by the way, if miracles do occur, you shouldn't expect to see a lot of them. Why? Because if miracles occurred all the time, they wouldn't get our attention as special acts of God. I mean, imagine if resurrections occurred routinely. What would the resurrection of Christ mean? Nothing. You go to somebody and you go, Jesus rose from the dead to prove he was God. And the guy goes, so what? Uncle Carl just rose from the dead 2 weeks ago. Now I got to give the inheritance back. Right? No, it's got to be a rare event. Resurrections have to be extremely rare. They can't happen all the time. In fact, the only way you can recognize a miracle is against the backdrop of regular natural events. All right, so miracles do occur because we know God exists, or at least the greatest miracle has occurred, the creation of the universe out of nothing. Now we just want to see if the greatest miracle in the New Testament has occurred, and that is the resurrection of Jesus. Now, there's a lot of evidence for this. We don't have much time to go through. We're just going to go through a couple of lines. I'm going to list 8 lines, but we're only going to look at 2, okay? So, and they all begin with the letter E. I've alliterated it all because I used to be a Baptist, okay? First is we have early sources. In other words, the documents and the material in the New Testament documents are very early. There are eyewitness details throughout the text. In fact, there's well over 100 we list in chapter 10 of I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. There's embarrassing stories. I'll explain that, and excruciating deaths in a minute. We're going to look at 3 and 4. Number 5, Embedded confirmation. This is probably the best evidence you've never heard about that show that the New Testament writers are independently witnessing the same events. If you want to learn about this, you just need to Google 2 words. Here are the 2 words. Undesigned coincidences. Google undesigned coincidences. It's very interesting stuff. I call it embedded confirmation. Expected predictions. That deals with Old Testament prophecy. If I only had one Old Testament prophecy to make my case on, it would be Isaiah chapter 53, written 700 years in advance. There's extra biblical writers. There are 10 ancient non-Christian sources within 150 years of Jesus' life. And these people give little short bursts of information about what happened to Jesus and the apostles. People like Josephus, Suetonius, Thallus, Phlegon, these household names you all know about. And when you add up their references, you get a story congruent with the New Testament. They don't say they believe Jesus rose from the dead, but these people say the disciples believed he rose from the dead and were willing to die for it. And then number 8, explosive growth of the church. It's really hard to explain how Christianity, which came out of Judaism on an empirical claim that a man rose from the dead, could do that if his tomb was occupied. Because what could the Romans or the Jews have done who did, and they didn't want Christianity to go forward. What could they have done to squash Christianity right then and there? Taken the body out. Everyone knew where the tomb was. They could have done it, and they couldn't do it. Why? Because Jesus was still using his body. It's hard to explain how Christianity could have arisen out of Jerusalem if Jesus' body was in the tomb. It wasn't there. Now, as I say, we don't have time to go through all these. We're just going to spend a little bit of time on embarrassing stories and excruciating deaths. Embarrassing stories, what's that? Scientists know, or I should say historians know, that when they're investigating a text and there's something embarrassing to the author or authors in the text, it's probably true. Why? Because you're not going to make up things that make you look bad. You might make up things that make you look good, but you won't make up things that make you look bad. In fact, let me ask you guys this question. How many people in here have ever lied to make yourself look good? Look, if you don't have your hand up right now, you're lying to make yourself look good. And it's not working. We know you're lying. All right, how many people have ever lied to make yourself look bad? You don't do that, right? You don't lie to make yourself look bad or embarrassed. But the New Testament writers have filled the New Testament with embarrassing details they never would have invented. That's why we call this the dove factor. They're not making this up. Let me just give you a few of these. Peter, their leader, is called Satan by Jesus. Do you think they invented this? Do you think Peter at one point said to, or Mark said to Peter at one point, Mark who wrote it down, hey, Pete, I'm going to make this a real interesting story. I'm going to have the Lord call you Satan. What do you think Peter would have said? Have him call you Satan. And then Peter says, Lord, I'll never deny you. What does he wind up doing? He denies him 3 times. And then at the crucifixion, all the disciples, maybe with the exception of one, they all run away. This is like a Monty Python movie. Run away. And who are the brave ones? The women. The women are the brave ones. Now, who wrote the New Testament down? Men. Now, what man is going to invent that he was hiding for fear of the Jews while the women went down and discovered the empty tomb? Would any man in here invent that? I mean, if I was there, I'd make myself look good, wouldn't you? I'd write down something like this. Let's say we marched right down there and we overpowered that elite Roman guard. That sounds good. John said, get out. Peter, roundhouse kicked him. Philip said, we'll be back. And then on Sunday morning, we marched right down to the tomb, and we saw Jesus, who congratulated us on our great faith. And then we went and comforted the trembling women. I would never say it was Mr. Sissy Pants. Why the women went down and discovered the empty tomb. And oh, by the way, why would you never say the women were the first witnesses in that culture? Forget about the fact it was embarrassing to men. It was. But why would you never say the women were the first witnesses in that culture? Yes, because a woman's testimony was not considered par with that of a man. So if you're making up the New Testament story, you'd only have the men be the first witnesses. Yet all 4 Gospels say the women were the first witnesses, which is telling us what? They really were. Even one of them was a formerly demon-possessed woman. Oh, gee, what a great witness. Yeah, very credible, right? Actually, I had a woman come up to me once and she said, Frank, I know why Jesus appeared to the women first. I said, why? And she said, because he wanted to get the story out. I said, that is an excellent point. I had not thought of that. Because ladies, when your man comes home from work, does he say much? There could have been a nuclear explosion down at the plant. He's not going to tell you. You'll see it on the news before you hear it from him. You'll be watching the news going, hey, hon, what happened? Oh, yeah, I forgot to tell you the nuke blew up. I've been hot for 3 days. What's for dinner? Look, he's not going to tell you. I can't even believe this next verse is in the New Testament, but it is. This is Matthew 28:17. What's Matthew 28:19? The Great Commission. Jesus is giving the Great Commission. He's got all his disciples, and he says, go, therefore, make disciples of all nations. Notice he doesn't say make believers. He says make disciples. There's a difference, right? Well, right there in verse 17, it says about his disciples, as he's given the Great Commission, it says, some believed, but some doubted. He's standing, resurrected, right in front of them, and they're going, you see that guy over there? Yeah. That guy over there is Jesus. Oh, no, it can't be Jesus. He was just killed not long ago. No, I'm telling you, it's him. Jesus is dead. The Romans know how to kill people. I'm telling you, it's him. Look, they crucified him. Put the spear in his side, blood and water came out. That was after they beat him. He's dead. It's him. It can't be. It is. How do you know? The women told me. They're not making this up. There's even potentially embarrassing details about Jesus in there. Jesus is considered out of his mind by his own family who come to seize him and take him home. This is in Mark chapter 3. Mark chapter 3. You may have heard the scholars say the New Testament writers embellish Jesus to be God. Really? Then why is Mark chapter 3 in there? This is embarrassing. His own brothers don't believe in him. He's called demon-possessed. You think they made that up? He's called a drunkard. He has his feet wiped with the hair of a prostitute, which easily could have been seen as a sexual advance. And oh, by the way, notice there are two prostitutes in Jesus' bloodline. Who are they? Rahab and Tamar. Do you think Matthew and Luke got together when they did the genealogies and said, you know what, I really think we ought to spice up the Messiah's bloodline a little bit. Let's put a couple of prostitutes in there. What do you say? Rahab, Tamar. In fact, there's a lot of shady people in the bloodline. Judah, from where we get the term Jew from, not a good guy. Read about him. David, a man after God's own heart. Yeah, but he's a liar, adulterer, and a murderer. Gee, I guess there's hope for the rest of us then. Bathsheba's in there. Do you know when Matthew gets to her in the genealogy, he won't mention her name. You know what he says then otherwise? He says, Uriah's wife. Ooh. That's a slam. He's telling the truth, but it's a slam. Right, who is Uriah? Uriah was the husband of Bathsheba, whom David had killed so he could have Bathsheba. But it's in there. They're telling the truth, warts and all. In fact, Jesus is hung on a tree. But according to Deuteronomy 21:23, anyone who's hung on a tree is under God's curse. If you're making a Messiah to the Jews, you don't hang him on a tree. He was under God's curse. What curse? The curse of sin we all put him under. You know, there are two famous trees in the Bible. There's the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and the tree of life. And they're both in Genesis. And then at the end of time, in Revelation, the tree of life appears again. But you know, there's a tree right in the middle of those two trees. It's the tree upon which Jesus hung. Since we blew it at the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, Jesus was hung on a tree because of our sin. And so we could then be admitted to the tree of life if we accept what he's done. Not our works, his. There's many more embarrassing details. We don't have time to get into them. We got to go to our final one, and that is excruciating deaths. And this is the argument that says that these men who were in a position to know whether Jesus had resurrected or not died excruciating deaths when they could have saved themselves by saying, look, it never happened. Now, it's really important to remember that all the writers of the New Testament, with the exception of Luke, were all Old Testament believing Jews. They thought they were God's chosen people. They had a rich heritage. They didn't believe a man could claim to be God. That would be blasphemy. And they didn't think a man would rise from the dead in the middle of time. They knew that we would all rise at the end of time, Daniel 12, but they didn't think a man would rise in the middle of time. So what are these Jews who didn't believe a man could claim to be God saying that a man rose from the dead in the first century unless a man claimed to be God and rose from the dead in the first century? Why would they make this up? In fact, look at it this way. These are all Jews. What did the New Testament writers have to gain by making up a new religion? What did they get by saying Jesus had risen from the dead? They got kicked out of the synagogue, and then they got beaten, tortured, and killed. Last time I checked, that was not a list of perks. We're going to start a new religion. We are? Yeah. What's it going to get us? First get kicked out of the synagogue, then beaten, tortured, and killed. Well, sign me up. What a great idea. Why haven't we thought of this earlier? In fact, they had every motive to say the resurrection did not happen, not every motive to say it did. I get this question sometimes, maybe you do if you're a Christian. Are there any non-Christian writers that talk about Jesus and the apostles? I understand the question, but you know what's often underneath this question? An illicit assumption. Here's the illicit assumption. You really can't trust the New Testament writers because they were biased, right? You can only trust the objective, secular, or non-Christian writers. If you think about that for more than 10 seconds, you realize how stupid that is. What did these people have to gain by saying he resurrected from the dead? They lost everything. In fact, my friend J. Warner Wallace, you've probably seen him. He's been on Dateline more than any other cold case homicide detective because he solves murders that are decades old. A few years ago, he wrote a book called Cold Case Christianity, where he investigated the greatest homicide of all time, the homicide of Jesus. It's called Cold Case Christianity. He also wrote a brand new book called Person of Interest you'll really like. Anyway, Jim says whenever he finds a dead body that's been murdered, he knows there's only 3 reasons why that guy's dead. He doesn't have to look for 1,000 reasons. There's only 3 reasons, or one of these 3, or a combination thereof. There was either a sex issue, a money issue, or a power issue. Sex, money, and power. Those are the 3 things that people will kill for. In fact, they're the same 3 things that we'll sin for. Sex, money, and power are good things, but they're so good, sometimes we'll take shortcuts to get them. So if you're going to say that these people, these Jewish believers in the first century made up the resurrection story, you've got to find a sex, money, or power motive. Ladies and gentlemen, did these writers of the New Testament get real popular with the ladies for saying Jesus had resurrected from the dead? No. Did they get money? No, they weren't 21st century prosperity gospel preachers. Did they get power? No, they got the opposite. They were persecuted. Paul had power when he was a persecutor of the church. When he became a Christian, he was persecuted. They had no motive to make this up and every motive to say it didn't happen. And then why would they go and die for a known lie? Why would they do that? You say, Frank, don't you have to say that Islam is true then? If you're going to say martyrdom proves Christianity, don't you have to say martyrdom proves Islam? No, why? Because there's a lot of differences between the Muslim martyrs of today and the New Testament martyrs of New Testament times. So let me just give you one difference for our purposes here. The Muslim martyrs haven't witnessed anything that tells them that Islam is true. They just have faith. But the New Testament martyrs saw Jesus rise from the dead. They touched Jesus. They ate with Jesus. They verified with their own senses that Jesus had risen from the dead. Some people will die for a lie they think is the truth. Nobody will die for a lie they know is a lie. And the New Testament writers were in a position to know whether it was a lie or not, and they went to their deaths anyway. Now, what I'm about to say for some of you in here is going to sound heretical, but it's not. Stick with me. If you believe the Bible's the inerrant word of God like I do, this is going to sound heretical, but it's not. Stick with me. Christianity is not true because a series of documents we put under one binding we call the Bible says it's true. In fact, Christianity would be true if the Bible never existed. You say, how can that be? Because Christianity did not originate with a book. Christianity originated with an event, the resurrection. Do you realize there were thousands of Christians before a line of the New Testament was ever written? Frank, how could you be a Christian without the book of Romans? Was Paul a Christian before he wrote the book of Romans? Of course he was. That's why he wrote the book of Romans, because Jesus appeared to him. Was John a Christian before he wrote the Gospel of John? Of course he was. That's why he wrote the Gospel of John. He witnessed Jesus. In other words, the book came after the event. In fact, we could put it this way. The New Testament writers did not create the resurrection. The resurrection created the New Testament writers. You wouldn't have Jewish people in the first century saying a man claimed to be God and rose from the dead, and then they went and died for it, unless a man claimed to be God and rose from the dead. They're not making it up. Now, I'm leaving a lot out because we got limited time here, but you can get the books to go further. The overall argument, does truth exist? If somebody says there's no truth, you're going to say, is that true? Does God exist? We went through 3 arguments. Creation, design, moral law. We get the attributes of God by those 3 arguments without opening the Bible. Are miracles possible? What's the greatest miracle in the Bible? Creation, Genesis 1:1. If that verse is true, every other verse is at least possible. And did Jesus rise from the dead? Just looking at 2 lines of evidence, it really seems like he has. So if you want to go further, there's that phone number again. Text the word evidence to that phone number. Also, the books and the DVDs are out there, if we have any more left. We're now teaching online courses. In fact, I'm about to teach a course called Jesus versus the Culture, Who Do You Trust? 𝗬𝗓 is about to teach a course called Progressive Christianity. Go to our website to learn more about those. Also, we're on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. In fact, we're so into YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook, we've actually combined these 3 into one social media platform. We call it 𝗬𝗏𝒡face. It's kind of a Jersey thing. Have you signed up for 𝗬𝗏𝒡face yet? We're also on Instagram, by the way. Don't forget about the I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist podcast. And then we're on TV. And if you don't do anything else, download the free Cross-Examined app. 2 words in the App Store, Cross-Examined. It's got the podcast on there, the TV show. It also has a quick answer section. And there's one other thing I want to tell you about. I'm jumping the gun on this a little bit just so you can get something free out of this. My son and I, who's also a seminary graduate, have just written a new book called Hollywood Heroes, How Your Favorite Movies Reveal God. This book comes out in May, and here are the movie franchises we investigate in this book. Captain America, Iron Man, Harry Potter. Harry Potter? Yeah, you'd be surprised. Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, Batman, and Wonder Woman. And all of these heroes point to the ultimate hero, Jesus of Nazareth. If you want to get your kids interested in Christianity and you want to teach them life lessons and biblical theology and apologetics, or even if they're not kids, get this book. Now, if you go to HollywoodHeroesBook.com and pre-order the book, we're going to send you the audio version for free now. The audio version's already, we have it already, but the book doesn't come out till May 3rd. Once May 3rd arrives, you won't be able to get the audio book without paying for it. So check that out. All right? All right, so it's true. So what? The best news is this. Somebody actually did die for you. Now, when I was in the Navy, I was in naval aviation. We had to earn golden wings, which were fairly hard to earn. But there's nothing more difficult in the Navy or any service to earn than a golden trident. That's what the SEALs wear. Very few people that start SEAL training make it through. Just a handful of a percent make it through every class. But those that do become SEALs and wear that trident with pride. It is literally their identity. When 𝗦𝗨𝗣𝗥𝗧 was buried in Rosecrans Cemetery just outside of San Diego, just about every Navy SEAL on the West Coast showed up for his funeral. And when they showed up for his funeral, they passed his casket and took off their tridents and pressed them into his casket. They took their tridents, they took their identity, and put their identity in the one that died for them. That's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to put our identity in our Savior. But our culture says, oh, no, don't put your identity in your Savior. Put your identity in your political party. Or put your identity in your race. There's only one race, the human race. Or put your identity in your good works. Or put your identity in your church. Or put your identity in your bank account. Or put your identity in your boyfriend or your girlfriend or your sexual orientation or your vocation. Ladies and gentlemen, none of those things are ultimate. You and I were all meant to put our identity in our Savior. Do you know that every other world religion in the world requires you to achieve your identity? Do you know in Christianity you don't achieve your identity, you receive your identity. If you have to achieve your identity, all the pressure's on you. There's always somebody that can do it better. And what happens when you can't do it anymore? What happens when you don't look as good? What happens when you don't have that good job that you have now? What happens when that person you put your identity in has walked out on you or, God forbid, passes away? Do you no longer have an identity? No, your identity is meant to be put in something eternal, and that's the God that died for you. And all you need to do to accept this identity is simply that, simply accept it. He didn't just die, he also rose again. And by trusting in him, you can have that identity forever and be sealed with the Holy Spirit. There's nothing you can do to earn it. Now, we will do good works out of gratitude for what Christ has done, but we don't do good works to try and achieve salvation. Why? Because no matter how many good works you've done enough bad works to damn you. You need somebody to cover all of your sins. And that's what Jesus does. Those two guys that were next to 𝗦𝗨𝗣𝗢𝗍 could do nothing to be saved except accept what he's done. He took the grenade for them. That's what Jesus does for us. All right. Before we go to questions, I want to talk about briefly where Ratio Christi meets. Vince, tell people where Ratio Christi meets so they can be a part of getting more evidence and going deeper in these issues. Go ahead, man.
Yeah, so again, Ratio Christi, we meet on Tuesday nights at 7 p.m. in the Marriott Library here on campus. If you want to buy, you can always reach out to us. We have a Facebook page. You can message on Facebook. Or in the back of the booth, you can stop by, see me, Aaron, or one of the people from Ratio. We're passing out cards as well. So yeah, definitely come by. If you're interested in this kind of stuff, I want to learn more, want to dig into it. Or if you just have questions. Also, if you have questions as an atheist, where you're like, I just don't see how this is possible, or I have this objection or that objection. That's what we do. We discuss ideas, we talk about this stuff, and we try to come to real conclusions.
Thank you, guys. And by the way, there's that number again if you want the PowerPoint. And if you want to do a short survey for us, just text the word event, and you can just text a couple of questions back to us, a couple of answers back to us. Now, I know no one likes to ask the first question, so we're going to move right on to the second question. Second question up here, if you would. And once the first person, by the way, this is being streamed, so the only way people can hear you if you come up to the mic. So, all right. All right. Hey, Jordan, go ahead, sir.
I'm a big fan of your ministry.
Thanks, Jordan.
Both me and my wife like apologetics, and we're studying it in the seminary.
Uh-huh.
My question is pertaining to Mormonism.
Yes.
I listened to your most recent podcast on false preachers.
Yeah.
Specifically, when I talk to a Mormon, I have some great engagements with some good friends of mine who are Mormon. Any type of contradictions I bring up with the Bible as the base of that contradiction, they usually respond with, well, that's your interpretation, and you are a flawed human being, so you could have a flawed interpretation.
Okay, stop right there. When somebody says you must be wrong because you're a human being, you could say, well, then you must be wrong about this because you're a human being.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
See, it's self-defeating to say. True, human beings do err, but human beings don't always err. And by the way, there are a lot of inerrant books out there. It's not just the Bible. Most kids' books are inerrant, right? See socks run. 2 + 2 = 4, right? There are a lot of inerrant books. So the idea that men must always err is false. Men often err, but not always err. So that would cut against the other person just as much as it cuts against you.
So it's a self-defeating argument.
Yes.
And then if they say that it's my interpretation of the text, which...
well, it certainly is my interpretation, but that doesn't mean mine is wrong. What is your interpretation? And let's use the best information we have to discover what the text really means. Because, look, if any of you are Christians in here, or Mormons, whatever, and you're in a Bible study, and someone says, hey, Jordan, What does this verse mean to you? You know what you ought to say? Doesn't matter what it means to me. Okay? It matters what it means in the text. I don't want to read my word. I want to read God's word. Okay? So you're trying to get what the meaning of the text is. And for that, you've got to do some digging. You've got to try and discover what the text is. It's not just my interpretation or your interpretation. It's trying to discover what's in the text. So you just use the best tools you have and then try and discover what the text means. But here's a question that you might ask somebody, whether they're a Mormon or whether they're an atheist or Muslim, whatever they are. The question I would ask is, if historic Orthodox Christianity were really true, would you become a Christian? And see what they say. Now, somebody could reverse that and say, well, if Islam is true, would you become a Muslim? You have to answer that question. But here's the reason I don't think Islam is true, okay? Yeah. Here's the reason I don't think Mormonism is true. Here's the reason I don't think Buddhism is true. Here's the reason I don't think Hinduism is true. Here's the reasons I do think Christianity is true. The question is, are we going to follow truth? That's the question.
Thank you. And if you gave me a book, I would read it.
Oh, nice try.
Thank you.
Nice try, Jordan. Good thing we're out of books. Yes, sir. What's your name?
My name's Tanner.
Tanner,
and,
go ahead, sir.
I'm a Christian, but I did think of this question. I was curious, is good relative to God?
What do you mean by relative to God?
I mean, did God decide what's good and what's bad?
Oh, yes, good question. No, God's nature is good. God doesn't decide what good and evil are. God's nature is good. This goes back to something called the 𝗧𝗕𝗏𝗏 dilemma that sometimes atheists bring up. It comes from a Plato dialogue. It goes like this. Does God do it because it's good, or is it good because God does it? And this is supposed to be a dilemma. Okay? Because if God does it because it's good, it's implying he's looking up at a standard beyond him and he says, oh, that's good, I'll do that. Or if it's that the fact that God does something and calls it good, well, that's arbitrary. Why do you need God to just call something good? And this is supposed to be a dilemma, but it's not a dilemma, it's a false dilemma. A true dilemma is A or non-A. This is not a true dilemma. This is A or B, maybe there's a C. In other words, the answer isn't God looks at a standard beyond him. The answer isn't God is arbitrary. The answer is God is the standard. That's right. Right? The buck has to stop somewhere, and it stops with God's nature. Gee, doesn't that seem weird? I'm pointing to myself like I'm God. I mean, come on. God is the standard, not something beyond him, and he's not arbitrary. He is the standard.
Is there a possibility that there could be a better standard?
By definition, what we mean by God is the greatest possible being. Now, it's possible the Christian God is not the greatest possible being, and there is another God who is, but I don't think the evidence supports that. I think the evidence supports the fact that Yahweh is the greatest possible being.
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right, thank you. Yes, sir. Ethan.
Oh, you remember my name. I'm honored.
Go ahead, sir.
So as I told you earlier, I've been doing ministry for years now, even at my young age. And
he's only in high school. Yeah. Adults, listen up. There you go.
Hey, give glory to God for that. But, my question is that in having conversations with people my age, I have a lot of trouble talking with them and communicating the gospel with them.
Okay.
And I've tinkered and developed it over the years, and especially with things that are very sensitive in terms of saving people's lives even. I had a friend that killed himself a couple months ago that was very, very against God, that hated God. And I felt a bit weak in my position because I couldn't communicate the gospel with him properly. Is there any advice on how to do that?
Let me just give one illustration. This is not my illustration, but I've heard it before, and it seems to make sense. Suppose you were to say to your friend, let's suppose you just got your driver's license and you went out and you drove drunk, and a cop pulled you over, gave you the breathalyzer, you're guilty. And this is a town of swift justice. They take you right into the courtroom. You stand before the judge and you look up, and the judge is your father, your physical earthly father. And he looks down at you and he says, how do you plead? You know you're guilty. Everyone knows you're guilty. The evidence is against you. So you go, Dad, I'm guilty. But I'm going to promise to do good works from here on out. I'll help old ladies across the street. I'll volunteer down at the soup kitchen. I'll be at church all the time. I'm going to do good work after good work after good work. So your father looks at you and says, are you still drunk? Okay, because you're not going to be able to do that anyway. But even if you could, is that going to change the fact that you're guilty of drunk driving? No. No. So can your father simply, because he's your father, say, don't punish this man, he's my son, if he's going to be a just judge? Can he do that? No, he can't do that. If he knows you're guilty, he's going to have to put down a punishment. So he says, okay, $5,000 fine or you go to jail. And you say, Dad, you know I don't have $5,000. So your dad says, hang on. He comes down from the bench. He comes down to your level, takes off his robe, reaches into his pocket and pulls out $5,000. What's the only thing you can do to be saved from punishment?
Accept the payment.
Just take it. Good works isn't going to matter, right? You just need to take it. That's what Christ does for us. He comes down from heaven. He adds humanity to his deity. He lives the perfect life. He allows the people that rebelled and crucified him to punish him in such a way that that punishment is really our punishment. He takes it upon himself, and then by trusting in him, by taking what he's given us, we don't have to be punished. So maybe you can try that illustration with him. That's what Christ does for us.
Yeah.
All right?
All right. Thank you, man.
All right. Thanks, Ethan. Appreciate it. Yes, sir. What's your name?
My name's Daniel.
Daniel.
Yep.
Can you get a little closer to the mic?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So I'm an atheist and
Thank
a
you for
BYU
coming.
student. I don't know which makes me less popular here.
You're an atheist and a what?
BYU graduate.
Oh, BYU graduate.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
sorry, former student. I actually was an atheist while a student, closeted, obviously.
Quiet.
So I didn't get kicked out.
Okay,
But
all right.
anyways, yeah. So I'm curious to know what definition of atheist you're using. As you know, there's probably like different definitions that people use when they use the atheist label. When you say that you don't have enough faith to be an atheist, which definition are you using?
Well, the title is playing off the traditional sort of definition that people think faith means. Faith, they think, means when you don't have any evidence, you just believe it blindly. That's what the title is using. But that's not the definition of faith. The real definition of faith is trusting in what you have good evidence to believe. So we're just playing off a title. So traditionally, atheists have said, I believe there is no God. There are some atheists now saying, oh, I just lack a belief in God.
Yeah.
And I just think that's a cop-out, and it doesn't say anything about the real world. It says something about the atheist psychological state, but it's not saying anything about whether or not God exists. So I don't think that's a good definition of atheism.
Yeah. So I am one of those atheists that would say I lack a belief. I'm not willing to say I know there's no God. Am I exercising faith, would you say?
Well, let me ask the question this way then. Here's the proposition. God exists. Do you agree with that proposition? Do you disagree with that proposition? Or do you not know?
I don't know.
Okay, so you're an agnostic then.
I'm an agnostic
Yeah.
atheist.
Yeah, agnostic. You don't know.
Yeah.
An atheist would be someone who says, I'm pretty sure there's no God. An agnostic says, I don't know, could be, maybe not.
Yeah, I don't know if follow-ups are allowed, but in the book you
go ahead.
acknowledge that there's not perfect evidence, like there's not enough evidence to be perfectly sure there's a God. But you're still justified in being theist because there's enough evidence. Yeah. So that would be an agnostic theist, right? Somebody who doesn't know but believes. Would you allow the same for an atheist to say, I'm not convinced that a God exists, but I'm not saying that I know there's not.
Well, I think the preponderance of the evidence beyond, for me, a reasonable doubt is that God exists. Could I be wrong? Of course I could be wrong. We could be in the Matrix, right? There's no way in knowing we're not in the Matrix. You got to get outside the Matrix to know that. Now, I just think that's silly, but it's possible.
Yeah.
Okay? So, let me ask you then, if historic Orthodox Christianity were true, would you become a Christian?
Define Christian. like
Following Jesus' commands and trusting in him for your salvation. Jesus said, if you love me, you'll keep my commandments.
Yeah. I would say it would, I would need more information. I would become...
No, if it were true.
Yeah. Well, I'm saying then it would depend on what his commands are, whether I agreed with them. So I don't think it's...
Wait. Sorry. So you're saying if God existed and you disagreed with his commands, you wouldn't...
Yeah, of course.
You would go your own way?
Of course.
Okay. God gives you the free will to do that. But is that a rational position?
I think so.
Why? How?
As a hypothetical, if he asked me to murder my son, I wouldn't do it.
Okay. And?
So I think that's rational to disobey if he asked me to do something.
But if you knew it was God?
Yeah, even if I knew it was God.
And you knew that God could resurrect your son?
Yep.
See, the whole Abraham thing is a foreshadowing of Jesus on the same mountain, Mount Moriah.
Mm-hmm.
And God stops Abraham, but he doesn't stop Jesus from being killed because Jesus is the sacrifice. He's the lamb.
Mm-hmm.
But is God going to ask you to kill your son?
No, it's just a hypothetical.
Yeah,
I'm
no,
just
it's
using it
hypothetical,
as
but
a,
given where we are
Yeah.
now, we're past all the revelation in that
Yeah.
regard.
Yeah.
If it were really true that Jesus is the Savior and loves you and wants to have a love relationship with you, would you enter that love relationship and accept what he's done?
Again, I think that I need more information about whether, like, what he's asking me to do and whether I agree with it. But I would, of course, believe in God if I was presented with enough evidence
Okay,
to
so if I
convince
gave
me.
you a book, would you read it? Because he
So.
already has one.
What? The book? This book?
This book?
Yeah,
or,
I've read it.
Or
Yeah.
Stealing from God.
I've read this one. I haven't read Stealing from God.
All right.
I'd be willing to.
If I gave it to you?
Challenge accepted.
Okay,
Yeah.
beautiful. If you go in the back, go back and see Riley back there. He'll give you one.
Okay, sounds
Hey,
good.
thanks for coming, man. Appreciate it. Yes, sir. What's your name?
My name's Christian.
Christian. Good name.
Ironically,
Don't tell me you're an atheist now.
Yeah.
You are?
Well, I do identify as a Christian. I didn't become a Christian until I was in college.
Mm-hmm.
I left religion for a long time because I saw Christians condemning and arguing with each other more than non-Christians, and
Okay.
so I thought it couldn't be true because of how convoluted people were. And a lot of my friends who also grew up going to church kind of adopted other religions because they claimed that they were simple, because there was a kind of basic foundation of teachings and not all the divisions and, complicated mess that they claim Christianity was. So
Let me stop right here for just a second. Because those are judgments that are made about something which implies a moral standard, right? And let me be the first to admit, as I said before, that Christians often disagree with and much of the behavior of Christians is immoral. But again, when somebody plays Beethoven poorly, who do you blame? You don't blame Beethoven. If Christians don't play Christ well, don't blame Christ. Blame the Christians. Christ is still true and beautiful even when Christians are not. I mean, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah.
All right.
And so to say that if Christianity, if we're speaking just critically, is true and the evidence is strong, what would explain the mass, disproportionate division in Christianity compared to other religions? Why wouldn't it be a monolithic faith that is consistent teachings across the board?
There are no monolithic faiths. Islam has divisions. Mormonism has divisions. Roman Catholicism has divisions. They all have divisions. Okay, there are divisions everywhere. Why? Because we're people, right? Because we sometimes want to follow tradition. This is why Jesus famously said, you nullify the word of God on account of your tradition. We're all guilty of maybe having our own little traditions that we want to hobby horse on and divide over, when in reality they're not that big a deal. But I will say this, the major branches of Christianity all agree on the essentials. They all agree that grace is necessary. They all agree there is a God and we are not him. They all agree we're sinners, we're fallen. They all agree Jesus came, died, and rose again, and that by trusting in him you can have your sins forgiven, and that he's going to come again one day to judge the living and the dead. They do disagree over secondary issues. But Christians who trust in Jesus, according to Romans 10:9, if you trust in Jesus, you're saved, no matter what church you go to. So, sure, there are divisions on secondary and tertiary issues, but that's true in every worldview.
Nice.
All right,
Thanks, Frank.
Thanks, Christian. Yes, sir.
Hello, Doctor.
Yeah, we'll raise it up.
All right, thank you, sir.
From now on, everyone has to be at least 6'1". All right? Yes, sir. What's your name?
Dr. Turek, my name is Brady.
Say again?
Brady.
Brady?
Brady, like Tom Brady.
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
Dr. Turek, throughout the presentation, you referred to this notion that creation is derived from God's character. Attributes of the creation reflect his character, right?
Yeah.
How would you support that notion from the biblical text?
That the heavens declare the glory of God would be one. That as high as the heavens are above the earth, so great is his love for those that fear him would be another. The Bible a lot talks about the majesty of creation. And look, everything in our experience is finite, limited. The closest thing to infinity, which still isn't infinite, are the heavens. When you think of a heavens that contains stars equivalent to sand grains on 100,000 Earths, and it's going to take over 200,000 years to go between those stars at 5 miles a second, it's hard to comprehend that. But that's the point, because God is infinite and we're finite. You know, it would be strange if an infinite God wasn't strange to us. And one of the things that I think is important about Christianity and the Bible, do you know that the Bible disagrees with virtually every culture on earth at some point? Which should tell you something. What? That this is evidence that it's not invented. Who would make this stuff up? That you got to be perfect as my heavenly Father is perfect. Well, thanks, Jesus. I can't do that, right? If you even think about adultery, you're guilty. Thanks, Jesus. I'm guilty 1,000 times over. Right. Because it's convicting. And every culture is somehow challenged by what the Bible says. Which tells me that if any of us have a God that approves of everything that we do, we're making God in our image, not the other way around. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. What's your name?
Jackson.
Jackson. That's right. Go ahead.
Jackson from Wyoming.
All right. From now on, 6'1". You're a little bit taller than that. Go ahead, Jackson from Wyoming. Go ahead.
What's the best way to respond to somebody who doesn't believe that the canon is closed? The Bible is the final book of Scripture. There could be other revelation out there, a Book of Mormon, other letters of Paul that could be discovered. And they say, well, you could deepen your knowledge of God. How would you best respond to that?
Well, first of all, why don't we talk about the canon just very briefly, because canon means standard, and if we want to know how we even got our canon, we should take a look at some of the ways that people discovered what the canon is. Hang on a second, I'm looking for a particular slide here. Stand by for vectors, Victor. Here it is. Okay, what book should be in the Bible? Now, canon means standard. The canon is not required for proving the resurrection, okay? So, and this is what Bruce Metzger at Princeton University said, the canon is a list of authoritative books more than it is an authoritative list of books. In other words, what he's trying to say is the church did not determine what should be in the Bible. The church discovered what should be in the Bible. Okay? So how did they discover the canon? It was written by a prophet of God. If it was, it could be in the canon. Was the writer confirmed by acts of God or someone who was confirmed as an eyewitness? For example, Paul confirmed Luke, even though Luke wasn't an eyewitness. Paul traveled with Luke. Also, was it accepted by the people of God? These are the tests that went into it. There had to be miraculous confirmation. Is there any miraculous confirmation of the Quran? No. In fact, the Quran, in it, actually says, Muhammad says, I don't do miracles. I'm just a plain warner. I just warn people there's one God, which would seem to contradict the Hadith, which come about 150 years later, the written traditions of what Muhammad said and did. It would contradict those which say Muhammad did certain miracles. But they're 150 years after he lived, so they appear to be legendary, when the Quran says he didn't do miracles. Mormonism tries to say that there was a miracle that God appeared to Joseph Smith, the Father and the Son, but Joseph Smith's the only witness, right? Is it possible it happened? Of course it's possible it happened, but there's no other confirmation. It would seem to me you would need miracles to confirm a new revelation from God. Now, what does Paul say in Galatians chapter 1? If an angel comes to you and preaches any other gospel than the one that I preach to you, let him be accursed and anathema. In fact, Paul says, if I come to you and preach another gospel, then don't believe me either. What was the gospel? The gospel is you're saved by grace through faith, not of works. This is why Paul is all incensed in Galatians, because the Judaizers came in behind him after his first missionary journey in the area of Galatia, also now known as southern Turkey, and they tried to teach these New Testament believers they had to obey the Old Testament law as well. And Paul said, no, you're going backwards. You don't have to obey any of those laws. Don't rely on those laws. Rely on grace through faith. Then, out of gratitude for what Christ has done, then you will obey the law. You will obey Christ's commands, but those obeying those commands don't win you brownie points with God. Christ has already paid for your sins. Right. So I don't see miraculous confirmation of any other scriptures other than the ones that were written down 2,000 years ago. In fact, the book of Revelation implies, hey, don't add anything to this. Right. This is it. It's over. Okay, so that's why I think historic Orthodox Christianity is true. All right. Because there's evidence it's true. Okay. All right?
Thanks, Frank. You should come to Wyoming sometime.
Appreciate it, Jackson. Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
Hi, my
What's
name
your
is Chloe.
Hey, Chloe.
Nice to meet you. I think I just saw you on the movie, The God Who Still Speaks.
Oh.
Yeah, it was about canonization, but I just have kind of like a kind of off question. So I got saved during coronavirus, and I was kind of had an onslaught of online information about biblical Christianity, and in my search for knowing more about the Lord, I just, there was a lot of different movements I kind of ran into where I'm like, this sounds good, and I think this kind of led me through to wanting to get into apologetics, because a lot of the NAR, Word of Faith, and you see a lot of different hyper-charismatic movements, and the way that they define spiritual warfare, I just want to understand, what is New Testament spiritual warfare? What does that look like for the believer nowadays? How do we make sense of Psalms 91? And looking at different examples from the Old Testament, when you look at Daniel, and you also see like Moses, and a lot of those people still exist, the things that God forbid in like the law, you still see a lot of that practice today, and then you just hear so much information and a lot of man-made doctrine. And so, like, what is truth? How can I get some wisdom on that?
Okay, good question, Chloe. Let me recommend you a couple of websites, because there's a lot of questions in there we couldn't cover right in 2 minutes here. Okay, first of all, about Psalm 91. I want you to go to the Naked Bible podcast of 𝗦𝗨𝗣𝗣𝗢𝗏,
Yeah,
and I want you to search for Psalm 91.
Okay.
He has a whole hour teaching on it.
Okay.
That's where, you're going to be saved from pestilence and all that. Okay, so listen to that, okay? With regard to the other questions about spiritual warfare, I think spiritual warfare is more about truth, right? Can you know and believe in the truth? It's really more of a truth encounter than a power encounter. Look at the full armor of God in Ephesians chapter 6. It's all about truth. Also, there's another website that breaks down some of these questions. It's called gotquestions.org, right? If you go to gotquestions.org, it's an app or a website. You can type in spiritual warfare. You may get 15 different articles, right? You might not agree with everything they say, but generally I find them pretty good. You can read all the different views, and they normally come out at a certain place. So that would be what I would recommend.
Okay.
All right?
Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, Chloe. Great questions. Yes, ma'am. What's your name?
My name is Mary.
Hey, Mary.
And just for the record, I'm 6'2".
She made it. At least 6'1". She's there. Go ahead, Mary.
So I have a couple of questions. You can take your pick. So I have, and I do believe in God. Right now I'm a skeptical theist.
Okay, good. Come a little closer if you would to the mic.
Okay, sorry.
There you go.
And so, right. So I have questions about like the problem of evil.
Sure.
Or let's see, kind of like the design argument, or like like finding purpose.
Which one do you want to do?
That's your pick. Take you.
All right, let's do the evil one.
Okay.
Might as well do evil while we're here. What about it?
Okay, so I was just like wondering, how do you like reconcile with like unnecessary evil, because there are some things that like of course we have to learn in life, and like there has to be like an opposition in all things, like a good and a bad, and like so like an example that's presented, I can't remember who it's by, like it's just slipping my mind right now, is like a baby burning in a building.
Yeah.
And like, because that seems kind of
gratuitous.
Yeah.
Like, why does something like that happen? Why did God stop it?
Yeah.
That's a great question. Now, can I just ask you why you're asking this question?
I guess I'm majoring it right now in religious studies, and like, and one of my classes is the philosophy of religion, and so right now we're basically like analyzing every argument from every side. And
good. So this is more of an intellectual exercise at this point.
Yeah.
And the reason I'm asking you that is because there are two answers to this question.
Mm-hmm.
There's a philosophical answer and a pastoral answer. You want the philosophical answer, but if you just got up to that microphone and said to me, my baby just died 2 weeks ago in a fire, the philosophical answer is not the appropriate answer.
Yeah.
Right. You don't need a philosopher, you need a pastor at that point. Right.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about this, though, from a philosophical perspective. One of the things that atheists say is that there can't be a good God because he allows gratuitous evil, evil that doesn't appear to have any purpose. First of all, if there's no God, nothing's evil. That's the problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because there's nothing good, there is no purpose, so there can't be any deviation from the good if there is no good. Right? There's no purpose to life. It doesn't matter at the end of the day if people die or roaches die. It doesn't matter because there's no purpose. But it is a good question for an atheist to ask a Christian, why would your God allow this to happen? In fact, some baby, say, gets sick in a church. The pastor prays for the baby. The whole congregation comes around. They pray for weeks. And the baby dies. God, why? Everybody prayed. Is it possible maybe this God doesn't exist? Well, there's something that really helped me understand why God might allow this. It's called the ripple effect. Have you heard of the ripple effect?
Yeah.
That every event that happens ripples forward to affect trillions of other events. So if you were to ask me, why did that baby die? I can't tell you why that baby died, but I can tell you why babies in general die, because we live in a fallen world. But because I don't know why that baby died, does that mean there's no reason that baby died? No, it could be that that baby dying now ripples forward through a series of events that 500 years from now brings a great evangelist who saves millions of people. We can't trace all those ripples, but God can. This is why God says to Job, look, you just need to trust me. I couldn't even explain it to you. Your head isn't big enough. He doesn't say it in these words, but you get the idea, right? There's no way you could comprehend all the ripples. In fact, think of all the ripples that brought you to where you are right now. In order for you to even be here, your parents needed to meet. Their parents needed to meet. Their parents needed to meet. I mean, there's ripples that go all the way back. And it could be that something that seems inexplicable now actually brings great good later. And of course, the baby goes to heaven, all right? In fact, there's an example of the ripple effect in the Bible itself. In the Old Testament, Joseph. You know what happens in the Old Testament, Joseph? Yeah. He's sold into slavery by his brothers because they hate him because he's dad's favorite. And he is sold into slavery. He rises to power in Egypt. After going through a lot of pain and suffering himself, he puts aside a lot of grain for a famine, and then the very family that sold him into slavery come to Egypt, and Joseph recognizes them. They come to Egypt to escape the famine, and Joseph recognizes them, and what does he say to them as soon as he sees them? You dirty rats, you're going to pay for what you did to me. No, he doesn't say that. What does he say? He says, what you meant for evil, God meant for good, the saving of many lives that's happening right now. In other words, the evil that they did years ago rippled forward to actually help them later. There's an example of the ripple effect. So what I do, and when I see something inexplicable, I just rely on the ripple effect and say, God can bring good from it even when I can't see it. This is why Paul says in Romans chapter 8, that God works all things together for good to those that love God and are called according to his purpose. He doesn't say all things are good, right? There's a lot of bad things out there, but he's saying it works together for good. So there's more in the book, Stealing from God, but that's kind of the nub of it.
Okay.
All right?
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mary. Hey, what's your name?
Hi, I'm Max.
Hey, Max.
And
you're only 5'10". Sorry. Mary, get up here and ask the question for him, will you?
So my first question for you is, how do you have an apologetic conversation with someone who is comfortable with keeping contradicting beliefs?
How can you have an apologetic conversation with somebody who is comfortable with keeping contradictory beliefs?
Yeah.
What would those contradictory beliefs be?
I'm just trying. I've been trying to think of examples. I'm asking for our youth pastor, 𝗬𝗠𝗍𝗏. So as an example, I'm going to say for the Book of Mormon and the Bible.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there are things in the Book of Mormon that contradict the Bible, but people believe both of them.
Yes.
Well, you'd have to do that on a case-by-case basis, but is the person you're talking about admitting they're contradictory?
Yeah, they're completely fine with keeping these.
Well, since God can't lie and he's the standard of logic, it would be that one of those two revelations need to go on that point, right?
Right.
This almost sounds like what we call apatheism. You guys know what apatheism is? People just don't care. How do you fix apatheism? If I knew that, first of all, I'd be a trillionaire, right? Because I get people to care about stuff I want to sell them, right? And secondly, everyone would be a Christian, because I could get them to care and hopefully show them that Christianity is true. About all you can do for apatheism is pray, love them as best you can, plant seeds now and then wait. Because tragedy strikes all of us. At some point, tragedy may strike that person, and they may call you and say, let's talk. Because when the student's ready, the teacher will appear. Once their worldview is shattered by some event that isn't predicted by their worldview, then maybe they're interested. You might also ask them, the question I asked before, if historic Orthodox Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? Because I've asked that of several people, and they've said no.
Okay, and I have one more question as I'm saying this. My dad just sent me a text out of nowhere.
All right.
What were the authors that influenced you to start doing all this?
Well, my mentor, Dr. 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏, probably the most, because I spent most time with him and wrote a couple of books with him. And also, when he died a couple of years ago, they counted the number of books that he had written, co-written, or updated. The number was 129. Wow. Okay? He has written more books than most people have seen, right? Not read. Nobody goes to the library anymore. Where have you seen 129 books in one place, right? Okay? So he was brilliant. He would be the guy that I've learned the most from. But there's also people out there that I've learned quite a bit from. People like C.S. Lewis, quite obviously. In the more modern era, Tim Keller, William Lane Craig, Michael Brown, Lee Strobel, Josh McDowell. I'm leaving a lot of people out. Paul Copan. There are several great apologists out there that are living now that I've learned a lot from. John Lennox. John Lennox is a peach. Love John Lennox. So there's just amazing people out there already. My friend J. Warner Wallace, Greg Kokel, Alisa Childers. There's a lot of great apologists out there right now, and I'm sorry I'm leaving people out, but you get the idea.
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you. Sean McDowell's another one. Yes, ma'am. What's your name?
Peyton.
Say again, Peyton?
Peyton.
Yeah. Go ahead, Peyton.
So I have a very dear friend that was unable to come here tonight, but she is a very core believer in evolution, and I just wanted to know your thoughts on that.
Whenever somebody says, do you believe in evolution, your first question ought to mean, what do you mean by evolution? Because it depends. If you mean change over time, count me in, right? Look at all the diversity we have in this room. We came from one pair. Yeah, we're pretty diverse. There's change over time. If you mean that evolution means adaptation within a type, sure, count me in. We see that all the time as well. But if you mean molecules to man without intelligent intervention, I don't think there's evidence for that, good evidence for that. In fact, I think there's evidence against it.
Okay.
Okay? So that's what I would try and find out what they think about evolution. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, that you say to your friend, you know, macroevolution, molecules to man without intelligence, let's suppose that's true. Let's just for the sake of argument. It's not, but let's suppose it is. What does that prove? That there's no God? Of course not. You would need God to start a universe.
Right.
You would need God to start life. You would need God to fine-tune the universe. You would need God to put the laws of nature in place that drive evolution and keep them going in order to have this evolutionary process go. So even if macroevolution is true, you don't get rid of the need for God.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Now, in the book Stealing from God, we spent a little bit more time on that. A couple of other apologists that do great work here is Stephen Meyer and microbiologist Michael Behe. Vince, you know them all because you're in that field.
The intelligent design community is the best thing to Google if you want to look into.
Discovery.org. Go to discovery.org and talk about that. And there are some great books on it too. All right?
All right.
Does that make sense, Peyton?
Yep, it does.
All right, thank you so much. All right. Yes, ma'am, what's your name?
My name is Adelie.
Adelie, go ahead.
Yes, sir. So I have a lot of conversations with my non-believing friends, and one of them recently asked me why would God make sinful beings and then turn around and punish them for being sinful?
Well, he didn't make us originally sinful. He gave us the choice to either follow God or disobey God. And when we chose to disobey God, we acquired a fallen nature. But after he gave us the fallen nature because of our sin, he also put the rescue plan in place immediately. Genesis 3:15 is actually the first prophecy in the Bible that there's going to be an offspring of Eve that's ultimately going to crush the head of the serpent. Okay? So, yes, we're fallen, but God is the Savior, and it's by grace. There's nothing we can do to earn it. So even if it were true, let's just say it were true that God, to use an analogy, pushed us off a boat. But he immediately threw us a life raft or threw us a life preserver. Okay? So he gives us a life preserver to save us. Is there a problem? Joe, just take the life preserver. Yeah. That's not what God did, but even if it were true, he has given us a way out, and it doesn't cost us anything. We just have to take it. So I don't see a problem here. But also, a person that says that, if that's their objection, they're presupposing a moral standard, aren't they? Mm-hmm. They're saying that it would be immoral for God to do it the way he did it with Adam and Eve. By what standard are you judging this to be immoral? Are you saying that there's a standard beyond the God of the Bible? And if that's the case, who is that standard? Who is that God? And what evidence do you have that he exists? So anytime people bring up moral objections to the Bible, they're presupposing a standard. So you always want to ask them, what standard is this? Where are you getting it from? What grounds this standard? And see what they say.
All righty. Thank you.
All right. Thanks. Appreciate it. Yes, sir. What's your name?
My name's Rich.
Hey, Rich. This is such a polite crowd. Somebody asks a question, they clap. It's perfect. You guys are just so nice. Go ahead, Rich.
So there's so much evidence to back up the Bible, the history of the Bible. You know, we know people groups that don't exist today that existed in the Old Testament. We know they existed because of archaeology, different things. Is there the same evidence to back up the history or things in the Book of Mormon? And what's the best way to present the evidence to somebody who believes in the Book of Mormon?
Well, the question has to do with the evidence for what happens in the Book of Mormon. I'm not an expert in this field, but everything I've read about it, they say there is no evidence. There's no archaeological evidence from New York or any of these places where all this apparently began. The Hebrews are not related, as it says in the Book of Mormon. The plates that Joseph Smith supposedly translated come from some Egyptian text. There was even a story in the New York Times in 1912 about this. And you can see this, by the way, on Sandra Tanner's website. I don't know if you know who Sandra Tanner is. She is a descendant of Brigham Young, and she has a website. She came out of the Mormon Church and discovered so many issues with the Book of Mormon and the Pearl of Great Price and some other aspects of the Mormon Church, that she's published all this online. The Book of Mormon was supposed to be the most perfect book ever, but there's been 4,000 changes to the Book of Mormon since it began. So there's a lot of issues, and Sandra Tanner is the real expert on it. I'm not. I'm relying on her research. But if you Google Sandra Tanner, you can find her. She's somewhere here in the Salt Lake City area. Lighthouse Ministries, yes. And it's meticulously documented, very meticulously documented.
Okay.
So the evidence for archaeological evidence isn't there.
Okay. And what would be the best way to present that to somebody without making them feel attacked?
What is the best way to present that to someone without making them feel attacked? I think you always have to ask for permission. Okay. Again, if the Orthodox Christian view is true, would you believe it? Would you become a Christian? You might also want to lead with grace. Because, look, if someone was up here a minute ago who said they're comfortable with contradiction, okay? If somebody's comfortable with contradiction and they don't really care about evidence, then maybe using evidence is not really the way forward. Maybe the way really forward is to talk about what Christianity is all about, and that is that Jesus has taken the punishment for our sins, and by trusting in him, we're forgiven. There's nothing we can do to earn that. You receive your identity, you receive your salvation, you don't achieve it. That's freeing. That's liberating. You can know you have that right now. You don't have to go through the staircase and see if you're going to make it to whatever level of heaven. You can know that right now because Jesus came to pay. And look, if you had to work your way to God, what's the purpose of Jesus anyway?
Yeah. Exactly.
I mean, why does God send his only son to die a brutal death if it's not necessary?
Yeah.
Jesus is the center of all this. So you might just want to focus on Jesus and talk about grace.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much. Hey,
Hello.
how are you?
I have another question about the problem of evil, if that's all right.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. What's your name?
Milo.
Milo. Go ahead, sir.
This is I'm familiar with like all the theodicies and responses to the normal problem, but I came across a version of the problem that it seems like to me those typical theodicies, like even the Ripples one, don't seem to work. So I'm curious what you think. It's the problem of animal suffering, which is basically just that like, why would a loving God give animals the ability to feel pain? If he knows that they're going to harm each other in the wild and that we're going to factory farm them, it seems like you could even still get like all the ripples that you were talking about by killing an animal, even if that animal was not able to feel the pain that it was experiencing. So it just seems unnecessary. So I was curious what your response is.
Yeah, animal pain is something that I'm trying to think of the name of the book. It might be Nature, Red Tooth and Claw. Okay. And I can't think of the author off the top of my head right now, but William Lane Craig, the man I just mentioned a few minutes ago, has an entire podcast on this.
Oh, great.
So if you go to reasonablefaith.org and look up animal pain, you'll find it in there. And the basic point of it is that animals do not feel the kind of pain we feel, or we dwell on the pain. We know we're in pain.
Yeah.
We're going, oh, I'm in pain. They have a response to pain, quite obviously, but it's not the same level or degree.
Okay.
Okay?
Interesting.
So that book, and Craig didn't write it. Craig's referring to another book, but I can't remember the author right now.
All right.
So if you were to check out reasonablefaith.org, go to that website, and he has the question of the week, which he's probably up to like 1,000 questions now. And he has a pretty robust response to some of these questions. And he also has podcasts that go with this kind of thing. So check him out.
Yeah, definitely will do that. And
all right.
I suppose it's at least worth a shot. I am also an atheist, and if I had one of your books, I would totally read it.
Oh, you would?
For sure.
But if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian?
If I were 100% sure that...
What? Time out.
Yeah.
Don't put an unreasonable standard on this.
Okay.
Are you 100% sure you exist?
No.
See? So forget it.
Fair.
Well, you have to be 100% sure you exist to say it. But are you 100% sure we're not in the Matrix right now?
Maybe I'll put it this way. If I were as sure as I like could possibly be, like if I were as sure as that I exist, that like an all-knowing, all-loving God told me Christianity was true, absolutely I would be.
All right. So we'll give you one back there too.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Make sure you read it though. All right. Thanks, Milo. You know, these are all Christians who just want free books. Yes, sir. What's your name?
Caden.
Can you take that mask off? That's a little hard to hear. Say again. Go ahead.
Caden.
Say again.
Caden.
Caden. Go ahead, sir.
So my question was about, I'm trying to remember the exact wording of the slide, but
yeah, I'll go back if you want. What was it?
It was the one that it was the atheists can't reason without God.
Oh, are you talking about C.S. Lewis?
Yeah, I believe so.
All right, stand by for vectors, Victor. Do we have any airplane fans in here?
Yes.
Call for Clarence, Clarence. Don't
call me Shirley.
Don't call me Shirley. You guys. It's in here somewhere. That's it, Caden, right?
Yes, I believe so.
It went away. Oh.
Yep.
Okay, well, go ahead. Get closer to that mic, please.
So my main, I guess, problem with this is it seems to me that logic and reason should be able to arise out of just like atoms and such, just because like we can see and feel things, and I guess I'm not explaining this quite as well as
Let me ask you,
want to.
because you said logic can arise out of atoms. The law of non-contradiction, what material is it made out of?
I guess maybe I didn't phrase that quite as
ahead.
well as I should have. It's more that we as like pattern-seeing individuals can look at like an apple falling from a tree and so on, and like see and look at that logic in combination, like sorry, I'm really not.
No,
saying
look,
this
I think I see where you're going with this. What you're saying is that we have minds that are designed in such a way that we can perceive certain relationships and perceive truth outside of our skulls.
Yeah.
That's what Lewis is saying.
Yes.
The question is, why can we do that? In other words, he's saying we have this effect. What caused this effect? If it's just molecules in motion, if we're just molecular machines, then we shouldn't be able to trust our minds. But since we can trust our minds, then we should conclude that our mind was designed. Otherwise, if it's not designed, we run into the problem that Lewis is pointing out.
Why couldn't we trust their minds if they're just made of matter?
Well, because if physics drive everything and there's no immaterial realm, if we're just a mind, then how can physics drive conclusions that are true? They might drive conclusions that lead to survival, but not true. Like right now we're having a conversation, right?
Yes.
What physical laws are creating your response to me and my response to you?
I guess all of the atoms and particles and all the laws of nature just wrapped up together in a ultra complex way.
Well, yeah, but how do they come up with these unique questions? We're having a conversation here. Are we saying that different chemicals come into existence when I say pink elephant, and different chemicals come up in your mind when you say white rhinoceros?
Yeah.
And that would be more of a miracle than saying we just have minds.
Would it?
Yeah.
Because it's like I guess think of like a computer. Like we have like the screen of our eyes basically, but like you can't just like break open a computer and see, oh look, there's the pink elephant that's stored in there.
That's right.
You can go onto the computer, type pink elephant, and there's the pink elephant.
Right, but this computer's designed, and that's why we can trust it. If a computer was not designed, would you trust it?
I mean, I guess I'm having a hard time thinking of what that would even look like.
That's right. That's my point. That's Lewis's point.
Yeah.
Why we can trust our minds, we know that. That's the effect. The question is, what caused that?
I guess evolution.
But even if evolution were true, what laws that are driving evolution, where do they come from?
I guess I don't know.
Yeah, see, that's what Lewis is saying here. That when you get back to it, if the thoughts that you have are merely the byproducts of some atoms within my skull, then you should have no reason to trust those thoughts. But you can trust your thoughts, so you ought not reason back to an undesigned mind, you ought to reason back to a designed mind. In fact, here's what John Lennox asked some scientist friends of his who are atheists. He says, how do you do science? And they say, oh, I got this machine. And he goes, no, I'm not talking about a machine in your office or your lab. How do you do science up here? And they say, you mean with mind? They start to say mind, and they catch themselves and say brain. And they say brain, and he says, yeah, with your brain. What's the history of your brain? How did your brain get here? And they say, oh, my brain is the product of random forces that didn't have its end in mind. And then Lennox says, and you trust it?
Oh.
Yeah, well, why would you trust such a thing? Why would you trust a computer if such a computer could come into existence out of nothing if it wasn't designed?
It hasn't let me down before. Or it has, but not.
Right, because you already have the effect, but you need to reason back to the cause. Right? Your mind is an effect. So what caused your mind is the question. Laws, which do the same thing over and over again, physics does the same thing over and over again. How does it give us this diverse variety of conversation we're having right now?
The universe is a very big place. It would at least be a little logical that certain conversations would happen between intelligent beings.
Right, but where do intelligent beings come from? That's the question. See, physics does the same thing over and over again. Where does the genetic code come from? This is a software program, right? Programs come from programmers. In all our experience, that's where it comes from. So that's where we have an effect, this software program. The question is, what caused it? Why would we say natural laws which do the same thing over and over again, which can't produce this specified complexity we see in a code?
Is every star the same?
No, every star is not the same, but stars aren't specified and complex. Specified complexity is like a program, like a pattern, like this is specified complexity. You would never see this. Let me just give you a simple example. If you're walking along the beach and you see John loves Mary in the sand, you don't think the waves made that. You don't think crabs came out of the water and made that message, right? You say that message requires a mind. Well, if that message, John loves Mary, requires a mind, then what happens if you find a message 3.5 billion letters long? That's got to require a mind too. That's what we're saying.
But to that, I would say you could see like a skull in the rocks and say, oh, that's a message of an omen of death or whatever. And even though it was just the waves washing up on the shore that created this.
Yeah, we're not saying you can't find things that look odd in nature that, oh, that looks like it could be Grandfather Mountain. Looks like the way that stone comes out. Looks like it's his nose. Okay, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're not talking about specified complexity. If Christianity were true, would you become a Christian?
Yeah.
Okay, if I gave you a book, I have no more money left. Would you read it?
Probably, yeah. Yes.
Okay. Stealing from God. Thank you, Caden. Thanks for coming out. Appreciate it.
Hello.
Yes, sir. What's your name?
David.
David, go ahead, sir.
So you referenced the rapid expansion of Christianity being evidence for the New Testament and the validity of the New Testament. So
Right.
how would you contrast that with other world religions that also rapidly expanded?
Like
Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam.
Well, the reason I said the explosive growth of the church out of Jerusalem was the unique empirical event that Christianity needed to be based on, and that was the bodily resurrection of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
That could have been refuted easily by the Romans or the Jews, and they didn't do it. They had the power to do it, quite obviously. So I just find it hard to believe that this could have come out of Jerusalem when the Romans and Jews could have squashed it easily. Now, with regard to Islam, Islam spread by use of the sword, okay? You might say, what about the Crusades? The Crusades didn't start until 1095 AD, and they were a response to Muslim aggression in the Holy Land, okay? Christianity had been established for over 1,000 years prior to the Crusades. In fact, Christianity grew when it was being persecuted, whereas Islam grew when they were the persecutors. In fact, in the first 100 years of Islam, the followers of Muhammad tracked all the way across of northern Africa, across the Straits of Gibraltar, through Spain and were stopped in 732, exactly 100 years after Muhammad died, by Charles Martel, who was the ruler of that area of France, Tours, France. Martel means hammer. He stopped them there and repelled them, and eventually the Muslims retreated back over the streets of Gibraltar, back into northern Africa. But all of northern Africa remains Muslim to this day. It's spread by use of the sword, whereas Christianity did not.
So you'd say it's more of the means by which it spread, not so much the spreading itself, is what points to the validity of the New Testament.
Well, it's just one piece of evidence.
Yeah.
I wouldn't base my whole case on that.
Yeah,
I'm simply saying it's one piece in a number of lines of evidence that seem to show that this really happened, because it could have been refuted. How do you refute Islam? Right? It's not based on an historical claim. I mean, in fact, Muhammad and Joseph Smith have a lot in common. They had private revelation that nobody can verify. That's right. Okay? In fact, Muhammad, when he first had his first revelation in 610 AD, so he was 40 years old at the time, he thought he was being possessed by demons. He was having convulsions. And it was only his wife, 𝗦𝗘𝗏𝗧, who talked him out of it and said, no, you're getting revelation from the same God as Moses. Okay? But there is another realm out there. And not every revelation comes from the good side.
Okay.
All right?
Thank you.
Thank
also,
you.
do you have a favorite knock-knock joke? I was just curious.
A favorite knock-knock joke? I have dad jokes.
Okay, that's good enough.
Okay, so one atom said to another atom, I just lost an electron. And the second said to the first, are you sure? And the first said, I'm positive. Come on. That's my science joke. By the way, I know gas prices are going up, but did you know you can still get gas at Taco Bell for $1.49? Still there. In fact, my wife says I'm the 29th largest source of natural gas in the world, right behind Burma. All right? Go ahead. Go ahead. Yes, sir.
Hello, sir. Earlier, speaking of your wife.
What's your name?
Braxton Dake, sir.
Braxton, go ahead.
Earlier, speaking of your wife, you said you were bringing up the answer to the question of what is love being a chemical.
Yeah, that's what
in the
ภิģin
brain.
said, yeah.
Right. But I was just curious, because I would believe love to be like a greater power than that. That just kind of seems like a disconnect, because I would assume there is a chemical response in our brain to love. It would just seem like a disconnect.
Well, there are chemicals that occur when we're attracted to somebody or when we decide that we are going to bind ourselves to that person. There are different hormones that fire and all that. But the question is, love itself is not a chemical. And one reason we know that is because God is love, and he's not a chemical. Right?
Absolutely.
So from all eternity, God was in the Trinity and didn't have to create. He didn't create because he was lonely. He didn't have to create. He had perfect love in the Trinity, but he chose to share his love with other creatures, and so he created us. So we're not saying that when you love somebody, there aren't chemicals involved, but the virtue we call love is not a chemical. Love is seeking what's best for the other person.
Absolutely.
And you can seek what's best for the other person even when you don't feel like it. In fact, Jesus says, love your enemies. Do you ever feel like loving your enemies? No, it's a command regardless of your feelings. And by the way, when you get married, you don't vow feelings for the next 50 years. You can't vow feelings. You can't vow to, you might as well say, I'll never feel hungry or angry again. You can't do that. All you can vow is behavior. And the only reason you need a vow when you get married is when the feelings go away, right? You don't need a vow when you're all lovey-dovey. Right. When all those chemicals are going and you're infatuated and you can't think of anything else but the other person, you don't need the vow. You only need the vow when, in the course of your life, things start going the wrong way and you say, I'm going to love you regardless of how I feel about it.
Awesome.
All right?
One more thing, different question.
No, I don't have any more books.
No, I don't need your books, sir. I already have them.
Okay, good.
Question, what is the hardest question you've ever had to answer?
That one.
That one?
I don't know which one. Questions, look, first of all, nobody has all the answers to everything. But we do tend to get the same kinds of questions over and over again. They're kind of like the top 20, okay? I always say this, questions aren't necessarily hard to answer. They're just hard to answer in 2 minutes, right? And, you know, we put a lot of these questions on YouTube, and I'm amused when I see people commenting in YouTube. Well, it's like, well, you didn't say this, or you could have said that, or you didn't say this. Well, sure, we could all ask questions better, but not in 2 minutes, right? You can't cram everything you know into 2 minutes. In fact, who was the young lady that asked earlier? You asked some questions that were very deep, and I had to refer you to websites, right? And books, right? Because you can't. I love what John Lennox says about Q&A. He says, I don't have a complete answer for you, but I have a doorway to an answer, right? Here's a doorway. Here's one thing to think about. There's a lot more that could be said, but we don't have enough time. Go research it more. All right?
All right. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Yes, sir. What's your name?
Sorry, I'm not 6'1".
That's all right, man.
Braden.
Brady, go ahead.
So my question is that as history tends to repeat itself, that we start off in a very God-fearing, sovereign country, and then as time progresses, we move more atheistic, we have more worldly values as America is currently going. What types of things can we as Christians do in our society to bring us back towards a more God-fearing, God-loving country?
Well, be the change you want to be, number one. You want the world to be. Secondly, you need to get involved at every level of society. One of the reasons the country is where it is now is because the church checked out 100 years ago. The church in the 1920s didn't think they could answer Darwinism and some other things, so instead of engaging the culture, they separated from the culture. They created their own little Bible clubs and their own little schools, and they said, look, there's only two kinds of vocations that are godly. If you're a pastor or a missionary, everything else is secular. So we got out of the media, we got out of politics, we got out of education, we got out of so many things. The godly people got out, and is it any wonder why those institutions went godless, or those disciplines went godless?
No, it's no
We
surprise.
got out of it. If you're concerned, as we all should be, with the state of the country right now, you know whose fault it is? It's our fault, because we haven't been engaged. So we need to re-engage, and we need to speak the truth. And we also need to remember it's not our job to win political battles or any other battles. It's our job to be faithful and leave the results to God. You just do what's right and leave the results to God, because the journey is the destination. When you go through difficulty, that actually enhances your capacity to enjoy God in eternity. This is 2 Corinthians 4, okay? Persecution can actually enhance your capacity to go through difficulty. What you don't want to do, and none of us should be doing, is hiding under our desks. That's right. We should speak the truth and let the results, leave the results to God. So we need to start standing up for the truth. Why? Not only because we want to protect our rights, we want to protect the rights of other people who might even be against us.
Right.
We want to do what's right for them too, even if they think what we're doing is wrong. Right? Let me just give you one example that's going on right now. In Florida, they're talking about, let's not sexualize children between kindergarten and 3rd grade. Is there any rational person in the world that should disagree with that?
No.
I don't think so, but there are people that are against that. They want to sexualize kids, talk about transgenderism, homosexuality, and even heterosexuality between kindergarten and 3rd grade. And thankfully, Ron DeSantis out there in Florida, even though Disney put a lot of pressure on him, said, look, we're not going to sexualize kids at that age. And his press secretary said, this is not the Don't Say Gay bill, this is the anti-grooming bill. Ladies and gentlemen, when are you going to stand up and say, I'm not going to tolerate anybody sexualizing my kindergartner? Exactly. When are you going to stand? When are you going to stop? When are you going to say, I'm not going to do it? I'm not going to... I mean, oh, somebody may unfriend you on Facebook. Too bad. Right? Stand for what is truth. Leave the results to God. Okay? I mean, there are some things that we shouldn't, that are no-brainers, and yet people are so afraid to say, hey, this isn't right. That's right. This isn't right. We're not sexualizing kids. I don't care what kind of agenda you have. We're not doing it.
Of course. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you. All right. Tommy. Don't go anywhere. Don't go anywhere, Tommy. Impact Ministries. Don't go anywhere. We're closing this out. Go ahead, brother.
We're done. Let's give Frank another hand real quick.
You ready?
Impact Campus Ministries, along with IV and Gospel of Grace, want to thank Rocio, Christy for doing a great job, Aaron. And talk to this guy later. Maybe he'll give you a free book.
Let me say one other thing. Yeah, free book. Thanks, man. Tomorrow night, Lord willing, we'll be at Boise State. Okay, so any Christians in here, pray for that. Any of you atheists, you want to drive over there and get a free book, I'll see you there. And it will be streamed, hopefully, on our YouTube channel for those of you out there. So thank you so much. I just got to head back here.